Okay, we are live. Hello, chat room. Thanks for joining us, Prince and Josh. So this is our first time ever. We're recording another person's podcast on our YouTube feed. So you guys are getting an exclusive peek at an upcoming Hockey PDOcast episode. So I'm gonna hand it over to Dimitri, and he's the host. So
I feel bad. Yesterday at the draft, I was wearing like a 3-piece suit, and now I'm just wearing a hoodie. I feel like I probably should have just put it back on for this podcast.
Yeah, we're not important enough, or we're not as important.
No, you guys are important, but comfort is also important.
We're no Jack Hughes and Capo Caco.
Exactly. Okay, cool. So let's get started.
Sure.
Okay. Welcome to the Hockey PDOcast. My name is Dimitri Filipovich, and joining me are my good buddies Elon and Brian from the Keeping Karlsson podcast. What's going on, guys?
Hey, Dimitri. Happy to talk to you again for the second time in just a week. So exciting.
Hello too from me, Dimitri, and Elon. Elon, you didn't say hi to me, but I guess it was implied. We're so excited to be back on the PDOcast with you, going over all the stuff we said 1 year ago.
So this
roughly.
is technically part 2 of this fantasy extravaganza we're doing for everyone that hasn't, for whatever reason, checked it out yet. Go to the Keeping Karlsson feed and listen to part 1 from last week. I guess we recorded it last Sunday night. They posted it on Monday, where we looked at the Western Conference. And basically, just to sum it up, what we're doing here is we went back and we listened to a show that we did back in late September before the season started, where we kind of gave our predictions on each team. We spent 4 minutes on each Western Conference and Eastern Conference team. And we discussed kind of our favorite storylines or players to watch or breakouts or stay away players from a fantasy perspective. And it was a fun exercise to go back and listen to some of the stuff we said, because obviously now that we got a full 82 game sample size of everything, we can kind of go back and mark our own predictions. And there was some stuff which I think we nailed, and hopefully we help people win their leagues or do well, and other stuff. With the benefit of hindsight, it sounds pretty terrible. So it was a good laugh in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed listening back and then recording the Western Conference. I think overall the key thing is that everything I said was for the most part right, but then you guys sort of flubbed a bunch of things. But overall, I think we did a good job.
Yeah, and I think the theme was also the smugger I sounded about something, the more likely I was to be wrong about it.
Yeah, but now I'm really looking forward to going over the Eastern Conference. I just listened to that episode again recently that we did back in late September, and we had some fun predictions. And yeah, it'll be fun to go through it all. So let's start this timer.
Well, before we get into it, though, I think I want to tell the listeners why this is an important exercise. It's not, we're just going back and patting ourselves on the back, because I think we're going to be very critical of ourselves where it merits it. But I think from an analyst perspective, this is a really important exercise, because I think an important skill is being sort of reflective and also not married to our evaluations. Like sometimes we say we like a certain player or a certain team, and then it's really easy to kind of just stick to it and no matter what, try to make the stats work in your favor just so that you wind up making yourself look smart. But I think I love kind of learning and adapting. And obviously as another season plays out, certain players either outperform our expectations or underperform, and things change. And it's important to kind of adjust with the time. So hopefully that's what we're going to do here. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we were right and where we were wrong. And with that said, let's start off with the Bruins. Let me get the 4-minute timer going. So we spent a lot of time talking about Jake DeBrusk on the Bruins section. And we sort of pointed out that he was, due for a big breakout, because he really, especially in the 2017 or I guess the 2018 postseason, really stepped up for the Bruins in their series against the Leafs and then against the Lightning, and became kind of a counted on scorer for them. And while his numbers did see an uptick in terms of the goal scoring department, especially this year, I don't think we would, from a fantasy perspective at least, view it as a success or our praise of him as winding up looking smart and correct, because I don't think he necessarily had the full breakout that we were all hoping he would have.
Yeah, he ended the season with a 51-point pace, 42 points in 68 games. The funny thing is, everything we kind of were saying were right. We were excited about DeBrusk getting on that top power play and holding that spot. We were saying it was going to be him or Ryan Donato, and obviously Donato ends the season not even on the Bruins. So DeBrusk did hold that top power play spot. He played on the second line for the most part. His deployment looked good. He just didn't turn into a superstar. Maybe we were hoping for at least a 60+ point player. But I feel now his situation is kind of the same going to next season. So I hope he could improve on this, since he's going to be on that stacked top power play.
Yeah, I did see a few areas, like just deployment wise, where he got better, but he actually held remarkably steady year over year in his rate stats. So he got, he saw maybe another few shifts per game playing on the second line with David Krejci and somebody else, and I'll get to that in a second. But even with that extra time, he wasn't able to do a whole lot more with it. And he didn't, his game didn't seem to really take a step forward and in the way we were hoping in his second year. So let's hope the third year brings that. And the challenge for him continues to be, I mean, it's great that he's been getting some turns on the top power play, and we hope that continues. But my concern is that he's stuck on line 2 in Boston with David Krejci, who's great. Like, nobody should be sad about being stuck with David Krejci, but his next most common line mates were Danton Heinen, Joachim Nordstrom, and Peter Cehlarik. So none of those, it's just not a great place to produce from if Boston continues, to load up their top line. And I'm sure we'll see a couple experiments next year where they don't, but I don't know if he doesn't take a huge step forward in his own game, how much more he can do.
Well, the good news is, as we pointed out, the power play, he played, I think, over a minute more per game this year compared to last. And we saw that I think he jumped up from 2 to 8 power play goals. And obviously the 5-on-5 line mates are a bit of a concern in terms of the actual quality of them. If he can stick on that top power play unit, they're not going to necessarily run it through him because there's so many other different playmakers there to focus on. But he can kind of, just by being on the ice with those guys and occasionally getting in the mix and being feisty around the net, I think he can walk into more points there. And, he only had the 3 secondary assists at 5-on-5 last year. And I think that's a big reason why he jumped up from 16 to 27 goals, but his point totals kind of stagnated in it just because he didn't really have the benefit of any of that kind of cushy secondary scoring. So I think if he keeps shooting the puck as much as he does and he keeps playing, at least in the power play with these top guys, I'm still optimistic. And given his age and everything and the actual raw tools, that breakout still is coming. It might just be a bit of a kind of like a post-hype sleeper.
Yeah, read the secondary assists. It's hard because you've got David Krejci, who's, picking up assists on DeBrusk's goals at 5-on-5, but Krejci can't really return the favor, right? Like, he's a 15, 20 goal guy. And so if DeBrusk, DeBrusk can do the goal scoring, but if his 5-on-5 line mates don't improve a whole lot, there is this sort of ceiling on him. But totally agreed about this extra power play time. That can be the difference maker. And hopefully a full season of it can bring them to 55 points and hopefully towards 60. And the more the Bruins want to spread out their offense and change how their top line works, the better that would be for DeBrusk.
Well, and one final thing on the Bruins before we move on to the Sabres, we did end our conversation talking about the goalie situation. And I think I actually had a direct quote that said, Jarro Halak could see up to 30, 35, maybe even 40 games. Played 40 games, .922 save percentage. He was tied with Freddie Anderson for top 10 in goals saved above average. And players like that, I'm assuming you got them very cheap, maybe even on the waiver wire, maybe late in your drafts. And I know how much we always talk about on these shows, how we love these sort of backup secondary goalie options that play on great teams, great defensive teams, and can put up great peripheral stats for you. And so if you had Jarro Halak on your team, I'm sure you enjoyed his regular season, where he actually, funny enough, outplayed Tuukka Rask and was the better goalie. And then obviously come the postseason, he didn't even see the ice, and Rask was, probably should have won the Conn Smythe.
Yeah, I feel like Brian was so right about Halak, because he was talking. Brian, I want to give you some kudos here. You were talking about how on the Islanders his numbers weren't that good, but he was totally unprotected, and so now he did get better protection in front of him, and he put up these great numbers. Of course, fantasy wise, Halak was so great for the good majority of the season, but then was kind of useless to his fantasy owners in when it counts near the end at the fantasy playoffs, because that's when Rask started taking over and getting all of those starts. So he sort of helped take you to the dance, but then after that, right at the end, that's when it kind of fell apart for him, fantasy value wise. Obviously, it worked out really well for the Boston Bruins as they were able to rest Tuukka Rask and take him all the way to the playoffs.
Yeah. All right. Enough on the Bruins. We shot way past our 4 minutes. We got to be more strict about this 4-minute time limit. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night.
We have 30 seconds for Buffalo.
No, you know what? I actually want to do more. Buffalo is interesting. They've got the individual talent in terms of players that we focused in on. And let's start off with Rasmus Ristolainen, where there's clearly a massive divide between how good he is as a real life on ice player and how good he's been from a fantasy contribution perspective, just because of his raw volume of how much he plays, how many power play minutes he gets, and sort of how many empty calorie points he winds up putting up over the years. Now, something we pointed out was we were wondering, what Rasmus Dahlin's insertion into the lineup would mean for him from that perspective, whether it would affect his usage at all, whether he see fewer power play minutes. And I think overall, if you look at the total package last year, the numbers were still there. But what I thought was interesting was, especially as the year went along, Rasmus Dahlin started playing significantly more. He was under 20 minutes a game for October and November, and then he shot way up to around the 22, 23 minute mark for the final half of the season, whereas Ristolainen was playing well over 25 minutes a game for the first couple months and then saw his usage dip quite a bit to south of 23 minutes. So I think we'll see there. Ristolainen's been in a lot of trade rumors this summer. We'll see if he gets moved, but I think that trend is going to continue because Dahlin's pretty clearly the superior actual player, and I think it'll behoove Buffalo to give him more usage and have him be their power play quarterback and shift away from these crazy minutes that Ristolainen's been playing over the years.
So we can talk till the cows come home, right? About Ristolainen's defensive aptitude and how good it, like that's one of the bigger arguments. A lot of us think it might be resolved as to how good a player Ristolainen really is. But last year offensively, he was actually really good. Like he posted some of the best offensive rate stats of his career. Unfortunately, it didn't really add up to as much as they would have normally been because Dimitri, like you said, Dahlin ate into his time a fair amount. Ristolainen saw a 3-year low in his 5-on-5 ice time, a 4-year low in his power play. A 4-year low in his power play role. So I really just want to emphasize that Ristolainen was still a pretty effective offensive player, just with less time on ice to work with. But that's no consolation, right? For anybody who invested in him or is thinking of investing in him for their fantasy team going forward. He's not going to be as reliable for points so long as he's in Buffalo, which is a shame because he is someone who I think when put in an offensive role can take advantage, but that doesn't seem to be something that's going to happen so long as he's in a Sabres jersey.
Yeah, well, and also, Brian, forgetting about the rate stats, looking at the total numbers, yeah, he ended the season with 43 points in 78 games. So that's decent enough.
That's good.
But it got worse as the season went on. At the start of the season, he was on the top power play, and Dahlin was on the second power play. And like Dimitri said, Dahlin wasn't getting as many minutes. And as Dahlin's minutes went up and Risto's went down, Dahlin took over on the top power play. By the fourth quarter of the season, Ristolainen had 6 points, 6 assists, and no goals in his last 17 games. That's like a 29 point pace. That might be what we're looking at next season because Dahlin's role isn't going to be getting reduced. It's going to be going up. And I love, by the way, Dahlin for next season to take a huge jump forward and maybe break that 50-point barrier for the first of many times in his career. And yeah, I'm very concerned about Ristolainen.
Well, I'm a big believer in less is more for Ristolainen. I think sometimes we can go a bit too far with our hate from him because of his underlying numbers. I think he clearly has certain offensive skills. He's not a completely useless player, but for making him look better, whether it is with the Sabres or whether it's in a different uniform, I think playing him more sheltered minutes, maybe playing him a bit less, giving him less exposure might get more out of him on a permanent basis. But obviously from a fantasy owner's perspective, that raw volume during all those horrible Sabres years when he was one of the best fantasy defensemen, I think those days are probably behind him. One final thing on the Sabres, we were high on Jeff Skinner, obviously, and the combination of him and Jack Eichel, and he was a monster last year. I mean, scores 40 goals, gets rewarded with a massive contract this summer. And I think heading forward, he's actually been a very durable player lately. A lot of those head injuries that he had before are kind of in the rearview mirror for him. And I think everyone's expecting the more of the same, just a ton of goals, ton of shots from him.
Yeah, especially with Rasmus Dahlin, taking a step forward. That's going to be good for Jeff Skinner, like good for the Buffalo power play, I would think. Brian, I remember actually when we recorded that episode, you were I think at that point I was really excited about Jeff Skinner, and you were maybe being like, Elon, tone it down on the Jeff Skinner a little bit. He ended up with this great season, 40 goals. It didn't start that well, though. Like at the beginning, he was bumped from the first line for a bit. I remember, who was it, like Connor Sherry or Jason Pominville, like jumped in and took over. But, by the time it was December, like Skinner was on the top line and he stayed there the whole rest of the season. He was fantastic.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to see from Skinner staying in Buffalo is that he does more with his power play time. He had a career high share of his team's power play minutes, but just 16 power play points, which is funny enough, as many power play points as he had in his last 63-point season in Carolina. So that's a place where he can improve. So I do like him. Like I found what he did last year mostly sustainable, and I know like it seemed like a rich contract for him to sign, but it also seems like that's sort of the price you need to pay to get someone to stay in Buffalo.
Yeah, no, and he's always been a weird guy because like he's clearly very talented and he shoots. I mean, it's not like he's just a perimeter shooter who's shooting from the point. Like he gets the good spots on the ice, dangerous spots on the ice, and he was always had weird low shooting percentages and funks. And I don't know how much of that was just the whatever was going on in Carolina all those years, but I think playing with Jack Eichel will help a lot, and we expect him to be one of the league's leading scorers again. Here on the Hurricanes, let's jump to them. We spent an outrageous amount of time talking about Valentin Zykov, and I fully blame myself because I was all about that. You know, he ended the year before playing on the top line. We heard all these preseason rumblings about how he would resume that role. He had good AHL numbers leading up to it, and I think I was very excited about him being as kind of like one of my favorite sleepers. And last year he had 2 points in 6 games for the Checkers in the AHL. He had 3 points in 13 games for the Hurricanes. Then he got dumped and went to the Oilers, had 0 points in 5 games, and then he was playing on the Golden Knights and he had 2 points in 10 games. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't even know what his contract status is right now or if he's even going to be in North America, but it's amazing just looking back at it now. Like there were so many exciting players and guys who had awesome career years for the Hurricanes last year. And the guy we wound up spending most of our time talking about was Valentin Zykov.
Yeah, and Zykov has 1 more year. He's with Vegas for next year and is under contract for $675,000. Which makes you think, I mean, Vegas, of course, is the team that might need him least, although I want to hold out hope he can be a good third line piece. One thing that remains true about Zykov, even though he didn't really succeed anywhere, he didn't get a shake anywhere. Carolina, he played less than 10 minutes a game. Edmonton played 7 minutes a game in the 5 appearances he had there. Vegas used him a little more, 11.5 minutes per game. So maybe that bodes a little well. Like he didn't do anything anywhere, but he also didn't have a chance to do anything anywhere.
Right. This is our opportunity to write history and not say dumb things moving forward. So let's not get people excited about Valentin Zykov. We got to talk about more exciting Hurricanes.
It's unlikely he's like I'm sure they find a way to ship him off to Russia, right? That he probably doesn't play again in the NHL next year. But I want to at least like semi-justify what we had to say about him and say like I don't think we've necessarily been proven wrong.
No, I think we were absolutely 100% wrong. I think the logic behind it was fine. I'm not going to apologize for that. It didn't work out. It looks like he's just one of those 4A players. It's going to put up good numbers in other leagues and it just won't translate to the NHL. Let's talk more about the defenseman because the other part of that discussion was a lot about Dougie Hamilton. We were all excited. You know, he's been one of these guys that always puts up big offensive numbers. And in Calgary, we felt he wasn't playing nearly enough for how good he was. And he comes to Carolina and we're like, oh my God, they're finally going to take the training wheels off. He's probably going to play your 24, 25 minutes a night like your top defenseman around the league. And he played under 20 minutes a game last year. Now, he still was very valuable and still generated a ton of shots and had good scoring numbers. But I think it was ultimately kind of like left a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth where it's like, I think we were all hoping more from him in this new setting. And you have to wonder at this point, considering that it's been 3 straight stops now, that maybe just those types of like highs, absolute highs that we're hoping for as one of the best defensemen in the league just isn't going to happen. Like he just kind of is what he is, which is a very good, valuable defenseman.
Yeah, it's really funny with Hamilton because first of all, Dimitri, in that episode, you were talking about how he had comically low ice time. That was a quote in Calgary, and you were saying you're hoping he'll get unleashed in Carolina. He ends up with his lowest average time on ice since he was a rookie basically. But the thing with Hamilton is what he does every year, and he did it again this year. He was kind of not doing much for the first part of the season, but he ended the year with 15 points in his last 20 games. So if he could keep that going into next season, then we're talking about a really high producing defenseman. We just have to see Hamilton produce not only at the end of the season, but all season long. I think it's possible. Like Justin Falk, why is he always getting all the top power play time? Why don't they give Dougie Hamilton a chance?
Agreed. So Dougie Hamilton hopefully gets the bump in deployment, which makes this the 4th consecutive season or something that we're saying something like that. The bright side is that Hamilton is still young, right? You would think half his career has passed him by being the guy who should get more time. He's 25 years old. In fact, so many Hurricanes, have you looked at their ages of their top scoring players? You've got Aho, who is in his, these are all their ages from last year. Aho, 21, Teravainen, 24, Hamilton, 25, Svechnikov, 18 years old, Falk, 26, Slavin, 24. It's amazing. Like they've got a crazy young team.
Well, the good news is it does sound like Falk will probably be shipped out at some point this summer, I imagine. And he's been in a lot of trade rumors. And I mean, he was playing like 3 minutes per game on the power play, whereas Dougie Hamilton was only playing 153 for them. And I'd love to see those numbers flipped and see Dougie Hamilton get that usage. And who knows, maybe that Carolina Hurricanes, which was Hurricanes power play, which was comically poor during the postseason, we'll see an uptick if we see them run things a bit through Dougie Hamilton and not just Justin Falk point shots. So I'm looking forward to that. And, Svechnikov, you mentioned 18 years old. We don't have any more time to really talk about him here, but I think the rate stats for him and what he showed as an 18-year-old as a future budding power forward is very exciting. And I'm curious to see where he goes in drafts this year.
Yeah, let's get to Svechnikov when we do our preview for next season, as opposed to our review of our preview from last season.
Yep. Okay, so Blue Jackets time. Here's a corner that I'm really standing on this coming season, and I'm going to stick here, is I'm once again going to be very optimistic about this Blue Jackets team. I know with Panarin leaving, with Duchesne leaving, with Dzingel leaving, all these guys heading out the door, I think people are going to move away from the Blue Jackets, especially from a fantasy perspective, and think, they're not going to have the offensive contributors there anymore. But if you just look at that 5-on-5 depth, which is something we were hammering during last year's episode, with Atkinson, with Dubois, with Anderson, with Bjorkstrand, you go on down the line. Now they have Bemstrom and Texier coming in. Like, the contributors are still there, especially at 5-on-5, to have a very interesting, productive forward group. So I'm still pretty optimistic about this team moving forward from their fantasy perspective.
It's interesting. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. I'll go. One name you didn't mention, Dimitri, and I wonder if it's because you think he's at the door. It sure seemed like the writing was on the wall for Alex Wenberg at the end of the season. I recall, I can't remember exactly, but I recall him like not wanting to talk to the media on his way out. And then eventually when he did say something, it was like, yeah, it's been a season. I'm not happy. And Columbus essentially said the same thing. And he's someone we were excited about on that preview last year. But I think you're right that Columbus doesn't need to give him another chance. In fact, I saw the suggestion recently that they would rather move, like even with the younger pieces coming up that you mentioned to help their 5-on-5 depth, that they might move someone like Nick Foligno or Boone Jenner to center to be used as their second line center because they have such a lack of faith in Wenberg, which is crazy. Like love him or let him go, Columbus.
Well, here's the thing with Wenberg. Obviously, I mean, horrible year last year. He was getting healthy scratch. It seemed very contentious between him and John Tortorella. I still, at this point of his career, given his age, I think he's clearly a flawed player, and probably won't ever replicate that year he had, 2 years ago when he got paid and put up a bunch of assists. But stylistically, he still profiles as a playmaker. And when I look at this team, they have a ton of forwards that I love. But, your Josh Andersons, your Cam Atkinsons, your Boone Jenners of the world, they're shoot-first guys who basically thrive on massive shot volume. And it would make sense stylistically that you would put a guy like Wenberg next to those guys and help him and allow him to get them the puck and control the game as a playmaker. And that would be a good fit and a match made in heaven. I just don't know speed-wise whether he can keep up with what they want to do and how they want to play. And that might just be kind of the elephant in the room that they can't overlook. But I still think there is a chance there. But, regardless of Wenberg or not, I love a lot of these names. I don't know, do you guys have any favorites? Obviously, Cam Atkinson was the one that absolutely exploded and had a career year last year. But we saw Bjorkstrand down the stretch score a ton of goals. Josh Anderson and Boone Jenner are guys who always just are amongst the league leaders in shots per 60. Is there anyone here you want to focus on?
I mean, I would say that Josh Anderson excites me because especially like in fantasy leagues where they're counting hits and things like that, like he's great for shots, he's great for hits. Plus with Panarin gone, it's obviously not great for Columbus, but the one player who might benefit could be someone like Josh Anderson. If he's the one who jumps up to play with Dubois and Atkinson, that could be good. Though, Dimitri, one thing I want to make sure we talk about on Columbus is you say you like them, but I think the big concern for me with them might even be their goaltending, right? Because if Bobrovsky's out the door, Korpisalo really didn't do well last year at an .897 save percentage. He's a guy that in our preview, you said it's going to be a make or break season for Korpisalo. It was a break, but you did bring up how they have Elvis Merzlikins coming up. So is next year his time, or are they going to try to get a goalie out of free agency? I think that's a big hole that they need to fill. But hey, Carolina had a hole last year and they figured it out, and they have to figure that out again, actually. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I obviously like Elvis a lot. He had another great year, and it's in the Swiss league, so who knows how translatable that is. But I imagine that he was at least promised some sort of a long look in camp, at least this year, to actually make this move over and come over to North America, considering he had a pretty sweet gig where I'm sure he was making nice money and just dominating that league. So he's an interesting sleeper. Korpisalo, obviously, the talent is theoretically there, and he's been on our minds for a long time as the heir apparent to Bobrovsky. This is his opportunity. But if you're the Blue Jackets, I don't know how you could feel comfortable just handing over the car keys and net to him after the year he just had. So maybe the option is, see what you have with those two guys and bring in a Curtis McElhaney veteran type to help kind of be a reliable presence there. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but I mean, I think this is going to be a good team and they're going to score a lot. So any goalie on them is going to, at least in theory, have a chance to get a bunch of wins and be a productive fantasy asset.
And I really appreciate your optimism on Columbus, Dimitri. I can't say that I'm 100% the same because we've looked at what Dubois was doing. Someone like Dubois and Atkinson, I think, is a pair we're doing with and without Panarin. And it wasn't looking good. And
right.
I guess this speaks to the faith you have in their young core coming up. And if there is, if they can, sort of hold the line, and like Duchesne wasn't there for very long, right? So they were good before him. They can still be good after him. Then I agree that Merzlikins or Korpisalo, both could have a shot at being a relevant NHL goalie, a relevant fantasy goalie, and could be available late in drafts. Like, it would be fun flyers to take really late in a draft. It would be a weird decision for Columbus to choose like goalie chaos going into their next season without really anyone proven. And Korpisalo has had a rough few years, but I'm all for it. I'm on team goalie chaos.
Well, and here's the funny thing. I think Panarin, losing him, we can't sort of understate that. Clearly, with Dubois and Atkinson, who are his two most common line mates, they're going to feel that. I think just the attention he was drawing from opposing defenders and how I'm sure he made life easier for them as a playmaker. But the one kind of area I guess they have to improve is, I think they were 28th on the power play last year in the league, and it almost can't get worse at this point. So I'm not saying that like losing Panarin is going to make their power play better, but what I am saying is that it almost humanly cannot get worse. So hopefully they'll be able to figure something out stylistically in terms of what they're doing there and moving the puck around and featuring other guys. And if it improves at all, then maybe it can kind of counteract some of that 5-on-5 dip that they're going to see from losing Panarin.
Yeah. Plus, also, let's keep in mind, if they're going to lose Panarin and Bobrovsky, that's a lot of money opening up for them to spend on some other players. So maybe it's better to, figure out what we're going to expect from them after we see what happens in UFA.
Okay. Red Wings time.
Dimitri, can I right away give you kudos? Because I remember when we were talking about Hronek, you nailed it with Philip Hronek on Detroit. Like, we were talking about who's going to be the main defenseman. I think Mike Green was injured at the time, and Brian was bringing up Cholowski, who did get a shot at power play 1. And then you just threw it out there. You said, hey, by the way, there's this guy Philip Hronek that might get a chance at some point, and he came in at the end of the season, was fantastic. And now I feel like he's a guy that I'm really excited about going to next season. He had 16 points his last 28 games. That's a 47-point pace. And I know you're the host of the show, but I just wanted to make sure to give you those kudos for mentioning Philip Hronek. I'm really excited about him.
I'll accept them. If you ever want to hijack this podcast and give me kudos and credit, I will gladly accept it. No, he had 24 points in 31 AHL games, 23 and 46, and had the hot end to the season after they had a lot of injuries in the blue line. And I know Cholowski kind of started the year early and was great and was scoring a ton of goals for them. But I like Hronek's upside based on what we've seen from him. And, I don't think any of these, they prioritize in this year's NHL draft reaching for Moritz Seider, drafting a bunch of young defensemen, but I don't think any of those guys are going to be ready to factor into their plans this coming season. So the opportunity is still going to be there on the blue line, because I don't think this Red Wings team is going to be good, but they have some talent to at least score goals, even if it is in garbage time. And it's not going to come from guys like Jonathan Ericsson and Nicholas Kronwall and Trevor Daley. So that opens a door, especially on the power play, for a guy like Hronek to kind of casually just walk into a 40, 45, 50-point season again next year if he gets the usage.
I mean, like, Detroit, we can make fun as much as we want about maybe, like, we'll see how many wins they get. Their defense doesn't look that great in terms of, like, defensive play, but we're talking like Dylan Larkin, Anthony Mantha, Tyler Bertuzzi, who you were talking a lot about in last week's episode. Like, they have a lot of guys who we can expect to start scoring some goals. Like, Larkin already had this amazing breakout season. Philip Zadina's coming in. So, like, Hronek could be playing with some really strong offensive players next year.
Yeah, and they have to hope that Hronek continues to blossom and bloom. I mean, I'm all for it. I'm only learning about him, really, right? Because we just have his NHL sample from last season. And Dimitri, you saw, like, what did you see coming about Hronek? Was it mostly his AHL production? How did he end up on your radar?
Yeah, it was the AHL production. It was kind of the opportunity, right? Especially from a fantasy perspective. Sometimes, like, actual talent is opportunity can be just as important. And I didn't really see anyone there that was blocking the path for him. And I just thought, as a late round dart row or someone you can kind of stash and pick up off waivers, that he'd be interesting, and he lived up to it. And Tyler Bertuzzi was another guy that I felt the same way. Speaking of opportunity, I don't think he's necessarily, one of the best players in the world or anything like that. But I was like, especially on that wing alongside Larkin and Mantha, there's an opportunity there. And, those three guys played 185 on 5 minutes together, and the Red Wings are a bad team last year. But with those guys out on the ice, they had like a 55.7% shot share, 54.5 expected goals. Like, there were good underlying numbers there. So I don't see why Jeff Blashill would move away from those three. And considering how much they play them and how little depth they have up front, I imagine they're going to get a lot of usage. So once again, just buy in on all three of those guys because they're going to get their numbers.
Yeah, if you're playing with Dylan Larkin, I want you on my fantasy team. Bertuzzi, he saw like in total, you said in minutes, but in games played, Bertuzzi played about 25 games on the top line, and that included a run to end the year post Nyquist deal. So yeah, Bertuzzi could be a real potential steal in fantasy drafts this year, like the sort of guy that you might not need to draft, but you can grab off the waiver wire real early. And speaking of just how great Larkin is, by the way, look at what he did for Gustav Nyquist last year, right? Gustav Nyquist was had a sudden career year and then turned back into a pumpkin in San Jose, although that was related to his deployment. But that's the whole point I'm trying to make, is that he played with Larkin. Larkin gave him the best year of his career. The year before, Nyquist was playing with Henrik Zetterberg and only had 40 points. But of course, that's like old man Henrik, which is a big difference between old man Henrik and young Larkin. So just keep in mind the effect that Larkin can have on his line mates, which helps both Bertuzzi and Mantha, who are both flying under the radar.
Would you guys watch a sitcom of old man Henrik with young Larkin? That might be a fun buddy duo.
Do you remember the fake Henrik Zetterberg videos from like a decade ago?
I mean, it's a good thing Larkin is young because they were using him an insane amount last year. I think at 5-on-5, McDavid, Kane, and Draisaitl were the only guys that played more than him, and I think that stat might surprise some people, but that's just how important he was to that team. So I think it'll be all systems go again for Larkin, and anyone that plays with him is going to have good numbers. Panthers, let's start the clock on them. We were concerned about Jonathan Huberdeau and his usage because I think the year before he hadn't been playing much with Barkov, and hopefully people didn't listen to our fears and drafted him anyways because he had an absolutely monster season. He had 30 goals, 92 points in 82 games. He was 8th in 5-on-5 primary assists. He was an excellent playmaker last year. And I remember what the rap with him for a while was health and durability and his ability to stay on the ice. And now he's gone 2 straight years without missing a game. So I don't see any reason why he won't once again be a top guy and moving forward into next year.
Yeah, we've talked about it on our podcast. Like, why did we get Jonathan Huberdeau so wrong? I was like, at the end of the previous season, like for the last quarter of the season, Huberdeau had gotten bumped from the Barkov line, and he was playing with Trocheck and like somebody on the second line because Nick Bjugstad had taken over on the top line to play with Barkov and Dadonov. And so I was worried, especially now with Hoffman coming in, I was worried about Huberdeau's opportunities. Maybe they're going to keep Barkov with Bjugstad. And obviously that didn't happen. Huberdeau got back to Barkov. And Dimitri, you called on that episode at the start of the season that Barkov is elite now. And he absolutely was. He had an even better season than Huberdeau did. So Huberdeau's a great player, and playing with Barkov just makes him so good. That's what Brian's been talking about in these past couple of episodes, like just saying how valuable it has been for Huberdeau to be playing so much with Barkov.
Yeah, we just didn't see him on that top line, and like we weren't sure if he'd get on that top power play, but then he was there, and I think he overperformed a little bit while he was there, which, I mean, great. Good stuff. But even if he spends another full season on the top line, top power play, Barkov is the difference between him being, a 65-point player and an 85, 90-point player. But I wouldn't be expecting like more than 90 out of him. Well,
here's the thing that, their power play was just, the power play one was obscenely good. Yandel, Barkov, Hoffman, Huberdeau, and Dadonov. Only Tampa Bay scored more power play goals than them last year. And all those guys had big counting stats. Now, you mentioned that Barkov exploded offensively and had his best year. The issue is that, and I know he was a Selke finalist or he was getting Selke love. And the issue with that is that he really was not good. He took a massive step back defensively last year. And I think part of that love was just kind of reputation and how good he looks in a uniform. But defensively, that team was an absolute mess last year. And it hurts that the goaltending wasn't there. And if they bring in Bobrovsky, I'm sure that they're going to feel like they can rely on him a bit more. But they were getting into these kind of back and forth shootouts and track meets, and it led to great fantasy production and great offensive numbers. But obviously they fell short of expectations. They missed the playoffs. They're going to make massive changes this summer. So I'm not sure if stylistically, especially with Joe Quenneville coming in, whether we might see some of those offensive numbers dip a little bit as they try to play a bit slower, play a bit more defensively responsible. And obviously, as fantasy owners, we kind of hate to hear that. But from an actual big picture NHL perspective, that might be the better way for them to go in terms of getting back into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's hard to tease apart exactly what Barkov, what his apparent defensive failings had to do with coaching and gameplay or game plans. So we'll see what Quenneville comes in and does. But we've also, Quenneville isn't a coach who I'm worried about coming in and tempering and negatively affecting his team's offense. Like, maybe it's like from your description, and I trust your take on it. It sounds like the Panthers need to reel in their defense, which means they'll also reel in their offense. But I have some trust in Quenneville that Barkov can still continue to do his offensive thing while being more defensively responsible.
Yeah, well, we know that Quenneville likes to ride his top guys and play them a lot. And also, I mean, if this team goes out and brings in Artemi Panarin, we'll see what accompanying moves come and whether one of these other great offensive forwards gets kind of moved out to make space for him, both on the cap and on the depth chart. But if you add a guy like that and that talent, all of a sudden, I mean, that's the firepower there is kind of unassailable. So even if they change their playing style, they're gonna get their points because there's so much talent there.
That would just be the most insane top six. If you have Barkov, Trocheck, Huberdeau, Dadonov, Hoffman, and Panarin as your top two lines in some combination, that's insane. That's not fair. They're not allowed to do that.
Well, and once again, our boy Henrik Borgstrom gets squeezed out of that numbers game and his usage and lineup opportunity. I'm still buying the talent. I still think if you're playing in like deep dynasty leagues, you should not give up on him. But just with the way this roster is shaking out and the players they have ahead of him, it's just tough to see him getting enough minutes and enough power play minutes to get the counting stats to make him relevant in a lot of leagues.
If I'm not giving up on Valentin Zikov, then of course I can't tell you to give up on Henrik Borgstrom. But I will say I am a little concerned by his showing last year. I know he didn't get a lot of opportunity. He did start with like 14 and a half minutes those first 20 games. Then it was 10 minutes a night for the rest of the season, which was about 30 games for him, playing largely in the bottom six. But he also kind of seemed to deserve it. Borgstrom had the lowest offensive rate stats of all Florida forwards last season, and that's including super random guys in the bottom six. Like you've got Jace Howluck, if I'm saying that right, Dennis Malgin, and even Troy Brouwer. And I'm not saying this reflects Henrik Borgstrom's true talent, but it is a big question mark. So I'd still love to invest in him because the raw talent seems to be there, but just something was not going right for him.
Dennis, don't call me Evgeny Malgin. Yeah, I've been sitting on that one for a while. Okay, let's talk about the Habs. I feel like the Habs, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but they were one of my best calls last year. I remember you guys were actually making fun of me, and I was calling them a low-key sleeper for me because they had such a miserable year the year before, but it felt like pretty much everyone they had in place had historically low on-ice shooting percentages and individual shooting percentages. And now I know guys that I cited like Charles Hudon and Arturi Lehkonen didn't necessarily benefit from it. But, you know, you look at Max Domi, you look at Jonathan Drouin, you look at Thomas Tatar, even Philip Dano, Kotkaniemi comes in, Sean Gallagher. Like, it was one of the better 5-on-5 teams in the league. They generated a ton of offense at 5-on-5. Obviously, their power play is an entirely different story, but they were 5th in 5-on-5 goals, 31st in power play goals. And I know both things count equally. And obviously, as a fantasy owner, you wish they were getting some more power play production, but I really like the pieces they have there, and they're going to bring that team back, I think, for the most part. And I expect, again, that they're going to be a pretty deep, fun, exciting, fast team. So I don't know. I like the Canadiens.
I think that's fair. Yeah, maybe we laughed a little bit. I think I said on the show, you're the first person who's had something positive to say about the Habs during the offseason. Obviously, one other reason why they did a lot better, I think, is Carey Price was much, much better. He had a .918 save percentage versus a .900 save percentage in the previous season. I do have one question for you, Dimitri, though. Like, one thing I'm concerned about, Jonathan Drouin overall had a really good year. Decent year. He had 53 points, so I guess that tied his career high, but he really fell off at the end. He had like 7 points in his final 20 games, was playing on the third line. Like, he wasn't even in the top 6. Like, what happened to Jonathan Drouin? Is he still someone that's good, or should we kind of be over him by now?
No, I think he's still good, especially if he's going to be playing in that top 6 and with some of those players. I think the way they were using him on the power play, I guess it was just the lack of other options, but they were playing him on the point and kind of using him as a shooter. And I hated watching that because I think he's obviously, his bread and butter is playmaking, and I'd like to get him closer to the net where he can generate some stuff for them. So I think you kind of need to temper your expectations. Like, he's at this point just not going to live up to his prospect pedigree, the hype he had coming into the league. But I think he can still be a good, productive player and replicate what he did last year, and hopefully the first half is more indicative than the second half. Now the issue for them is I I actually thought they were a really interesting spot for Erik Karlsson to come and play because he'd fix a lot of their issues on the power play and he'd fit really nicely with what they need from the back end. I don't know which way they go now, whether it's via trade or maybe they entertain Jake Gardiner, but I do still think that they need one more puck mover on the back end because it's pretty much Jeff Petrie and however many games you're going to get from Shea Weber at this point.
Yeah, Petrie was pretty admirable standing in for Shea Weber. He had 46 points in 82 games, and he held on to a power play role even after Shea Weber returned. So good for Jeff Petrie. I am with you, though. Only if Shea Weber isn't healthy, though. Because I feel between Petrie and Weber, there's enough. I'm trying to on the fly think of another Habs defenseman that I really trust to bring the puck up, and I'm actually not sure I can.
I do like Brett Kulak, but he's more.
Maybe you have a point there.
Yeah, Brett Kulak's more of a third pairing defenseman, but at this point, I mean, I don't have his games played in front of me, but just with the wear and tear and sort of his body type and the career he's had, I don't know how you could plausibly expect Shea Weber to play 80 games. I think 60 is a much more realistic ballpark, and I think that would be optimistic. So they need some sort of contingency plan. I think going into next year and being like, oh, we're going to get 82 games from Jeff Petrie and Shea Weber seems like a strategy is doomed to fail.
Yeah, for sure. So, by the way, if we have any more time on the Habs, do we get to weigh in now on the Weber for Subban trade now that Subban has been traded? Does that mean the Habs won since Subban got traded for nothing?
Oh my God. It's almost like they're two completely unrelated trades.
The trade is now Weber for Santini and Davies and whoever else, right?
That was amazing analysis.
I don't know. I'm so confused.
Yeah, I saw that online. Yeah, that's funny. No, you mentioned on the Carey Price thing, his overall numbers were certainly better and more encouraging. But I think if you look at it even closer, January 1st on, 36 games played, 928 save percentage. He handled he played 66 games. He started 64 of them. And I think in today's game where so few starting goalies are playing that much, as we see more of a kind of 50-50 split 1A, 1B, it's pretty clear that once again, I think they're going to rely very heavily on Carey Price and hopefully he can hold up physically. But I think what he showed us towards the end of the year is very encouraging in terms of, hopefully he's over all of those injuries and he can get back and round into form. And that's huge for both them and for fantasy owners.
Yeah, but so I would love for Montreal to pull a Boston here and get a really good backup to let Carey Price rest. If they plan to make the playoffs and potentially even go on a run, they can't be riding Carey Price so hard. It worked out so well for Boston to bring in Halak and then only play Tuukka Rask for 48, 50 games. There's a lot of UFA goalies out there. I feel like that's Montreal's biggest burning need, actually, is get a backup goalie who can play some games. Imagine someone like Semyon Varlamov, who also isn't really able to be a full-time starting goalie. Not to say Carey Price isn't, but I mean, Varlamov's kind of injury prone. Price, you still have these concerns. I would love for that to be the tandem in Montreal. I think that would be great for them. Or just one of these UFA goalies. They got to bring someone in.
I like it. Okay. The Devils. So it was kind of a bit of a throwaway season for them, right? Because of all the injuries. I mean, Taylor Hall barely played. It felt like they were constantly shuffling guys in and out of the lineup. Towards the end of the year, they did an admirable job of tanking, where I felt like a lot of those guys probably could have come back and played if they were in the playoff mix, but they just shut them all down, and some of their forward combinations especially were pretty hilarious to look at in terms of the depth chart. But obviously it worked out because they wound up getting the first overall pick and getting Jack Hughes. And now all of a sudden with that and the PK Subban trade, I do think there is a surprising amount of talent on this team. And we know that John Hines wants to play much faster than we usually think of Devils teams playing. And so you look at some of the pieces there, and I think they could be kind of a sneaky fun team to watch next year, obviously assuming that Hall can not only be healthy, but bounce back to the form that he was showing us 2 years ago when he was deemed the most valuable player in the league.
Yeah, what an exciting team all of a sudden. I remember last year we were excited about Hischier and Palmieri getting a chance to play with Taylor Hall for a full season, and that didn't work out. But now, once again, we have to be excited about Hischier and Palmieri. Jack Hughes, now PK Subban is there. I think maybe now the big question is, do you take a chance on a goalie like Mackenzie Blackwood in a fantasy league? If this New Jersey team is going to be good, I have no faith in Corey Schneider. I feel like this is what we were talking about in Columbus. I don't really have faith in Korpisalo, so maybe I'd be in Timmers Lincolns, and I feel like it's the same in New Jersey. Give me Blackwood. I don't have any interest in Corey Schneider, and I feel like this team could be good.
Yeah, the missing piece seems to be a goalie. All of a sudden, in New Jersey, you had a hole on their blue line the size of a PK Subban, I guess, that now seems to be filled. When we were looking to guys like Damon Severson and Sami Vatanen and Will Butcher to do something to justify their roles as the best power play quarterback on the Devils since Marek Zidlitsky, now we don't have to. We have a guy we can count on, and that's really exciting. So it does seem like the goaltending piece is the one missing. And that's why, and I'm totally with Elon that Corey Schneider, essentially done. Maybe good as a backup. And he's a guy I stand for a lot, as he was coming back from injury and trying to regain his game. I was just like, he just needs to get on a roll. And then he couldn't for over an entire year. And so I've moved on, but maybe he could be a good number 2 behind Mackenzie Blackwood if he holds up, or the Devils go out and get someone. But the problem is like, Elon was saying, it would be great if Montreal could find a good backup goalie to add to their team. Not much on the goaltending UFA market these days.
Oh no, like there's actually a lot, right? There's the 2 Carolina guys. There's Robin Leonard. There's Bobrovsky. There's Varlamov. Like there's names. Just it depends where they go. By the way, guys, can I just defend myself really quickly, because when I was listening to that episode, you were both making fun of me for wanting to talk about Kyle Palmieri so much and how I thought he would be a breakout guy.
I called you his agent.
Okay, so just to be fair, he had 36 points in 40 games to start the season, and then completely fell off. But Taylor Hall got injured, so I feel like it's a write-off. I was excited about Palmieri playing with Hall, and hey, like if Hall didn't get injured, maybe he would have kept that up. Who knows? Yeah, no,
I actually like this forward group, especially in the top 6 from a fantasy perspective. And Hischier, I know, first overall pick, you kind of expect, especially in another year, that he would be better. And I think he was a bit underwhelming, but no Taylor Hall there. He missed time with injury himself. But I think the underlying numbers and sort of the increased power play usage is very encouraging. And with some of these, especially on the wingers, like I really like some of these guys like Miles Wood and Blake Coleman. They generate a ton of shots. They're going to be playing with either Hischier or Hughes, who are excellent playmakers and will get them the puck. And so I think there's actually a really nice amount of talent here. And in terms of goaltending, honestly, I wouldn't panic. Like I think Corey Schneider, obviously, I think his days of being a number 1 starter and being one of the most consistent goalies in the league and like a lock for 925 save percentage are done, but he looked much better towards the end of the year. And Mackenzie Blackwood clearly kind of burst onto the scene and showed a lot. So honestly, heading into the year and just going with a tandem and just playing the hot goalie and sort of mixing up the starts between them, I think at least for one more year, that's a perfectly reasonable approach. So at least see what you have in Mackenzie Blackwood before going out and spending a bunch of money on a guy who just come in and block his path anyways.
Agreed. And I like how you also talked about the top 6 forward group without specifically endorsing Palmieri, which Elon is desperate for everybody to do. Elon, I'm going to point this out ad nauseum on our show over the summer and in our almanac, but Palmieri, when Hall went down, was shooting 18% at 5-on-5, 20% on the power play. He was converting at twice his expected goals. So he was playing unsustainably well. So I know it's tempting to say, he could have kept that up and it's just because Hall went down. It's not. Like he was playing that well because he had Taylor Hall and because he was doing better than he should have been doing.
Okay, so
you look at his, like without seeing his point totals or variable percentages, Palmieri's 18-19 season looks worse than other years in his career where he was not effective as an offensive piece.
But you're looking at the whole season, right, to get those numbers? Like,
yeah, I am.
It's two different things.
Guys. This is like kind of sitting in on like an old married couple arguing about who left like the fridge open or something. Like this is a wild conversation.
It's very important.
No one has ever talked this much about Kyle Palmieri, and I like Kyle Palmieri. I think he can be a very useful secondary piece.
By the way, Brian, if he got 73 points,
secondary piece, I agree.
If he got a 73-point pace with Taylor Hall, you're saying it was high numbers, so fine. I'm not saying he's a 73-point guy. I'm saying maybe he could be a 60, 65-point guy.
All right.
Okay, just close the fridge next time you leave the kitchen.
Okay, the New York Islanders. So, we talked about Matt Barzal in his first year without John Tavares. We talked about Anthony Beauvillier playing with Barzal and whether he would continue his goal-scoring pace and have a breakout. And we talked about a bunch of guys. I think obviously none of us expected, and maybe we should have, considering Barry Trotz's track record, that this team would shift from being one of the fastest paced, most kind of open-ended back and forth track meet style of games to just an absolute, defensive juggernaut where nothing was happening. Their goalies were amazing. They were playing these low scoring games. And so I think in terms of all the players we highlighted and stuff, we were pretty much wrong on all of them because, we talked about how Leonard and Greiss would have bounce back seasons that couldn't possibly be as bad as it was, especially for Thomas Greiss the year before. But in terms of the actual skaters themselves, it felt like everyone was kind of a little bit disappointing from what we had expected coming into the year.
Yeah, like Anders Lee wasn't able to keep up the 40 goals. Like Matt Barzal wasn't able to be a point per game guy anymore. Barzal only 62 points in 82 games. Like I'm very curious to see, is he going to be a point per game player like everyone was expecting? Like I remember the hot take that turned out not to be so hot is everyone was saying, I think Barzal's going to be fine that Tavares is gone. Like it's going to be fine. And like he wasn't. Like he was good, but he wasn't as good. And he's someone that I'm really interested in for next season because like fantasy wise, especially because he doesn't take like a ton of shots, like he's not very valuable if he's not getting like a ton of points. And last season he wasn't doing it. And now, so they've re-signed Eberle. Aside from that, like I don't think much is going to change about the team. Maybe one thing that'll change is they'll lose Anders Lee, which just makes it harder for someone like Barzal to produce.
Well, Barzal lost John Tavares at the start of last season, and he also lost 5% of Anders Lee's shooting percentage. Anders Lee, who's been shooting around 16, 17% for 2 straight seasons, dropped to just above 11, which is still very respectable. But that combined with Tavares leaving left a lot of goals unscored. And Barzal is not a goal scorer himself. And so there was nobody else to make up for that difference. You saw a big drop in his power play points. Barzal had 27 power play points as a rookie, 18 as a sophomore, and he was a part of this Isles power play unit that struggled. There's goals for rates were cut in half, and also fewer goals for it 5-on-5 too. The problem was not just on the power play; it was all encompassing. Just fewer goals for Barzal to help set up, fewer goal scorers for Barzal to help set up. And I'm so concerned that if Anders Lee is not re-signed, that we can't expect any more from Barzal next year, especially if they don't bring anyone else to replace him. I know how much Barry Trotz loves Brock Nelson, but I can't help but feel the Islanders invested in the wrong UFA forward.
Well, I don't know about that because I still think that there's more pieces coming. Like they still have money to play with, and I think whether it is, it probably won't be Panarin, although they've been linked to him. Whether it's Matt Duchene, whether it's even a kind of more secondary guy, like pretty much at this point, any skilled winger that can shoot the puck and basically skate while chewing gum will be an upgrade for them. So I think I'm optimistic about it. I think Barzal, the talent there, I know that he isn't much of a shooter. So obviously from a fantasy perspective, unless he's racking up the points, he's not that valuable. But I think the talent is just so prolific and he's just such a dynamic player and dynamic skater that I'm betting on the talent. I think in year 2 with Barry Trotz, it felt like last year there was like a bunch of sort of learning experiences for him where he would get benched randomly here or there for making a mistake just so that Barry Trotz could kind of teach him how to play a more reliable brand of hockey or whatever. And I think he's going to get better players to play with. He's going to get adjusted to this role of being the team's number 1 superstar without Tavares there where everything rides through him. And he's still so young. We need to keep in mind that I think he's going to be fine. He might not have like the absolute peaks that we were hoping for, but I think he's going to have a better year. And a name here, speaking of, we were talking about Hronek, I got to think long and hard about who my breakout AHL defensemen are going to be this year, because I also highlighted Devon Toews on our show, and he had 23 points and 6 goals in 56 NHL games. And as the year went along, they started playing him more on power play 1, and he was clearly their most dynamic, gifted defenseman. So I still like him heading into next year as well.
Nice. And what about like Ryan Pulock? Are we sort of giving up now on Pulock taking over from Nick Leddy as the top power play defenseman? Like, is Devon Toews just going to usurp him and be the guy? Because Pulock is someone we've been waiting for forever. And then last year they kept Nick Leddy on the top power play. Then, like you said, eventually Devon Toews seemed to be getting more of a shot.
I like Devon Toews more as a player there, and that's just sort of a personal preference in terms of how I like power plays run. Pulock is more like your Justin Falk type, who's just going to have a big shot and hammering it from the point, and he might get that opportunity. But I think it was pretty clear that when Devon Toews was on that power play unit, the puck was flying around and they were much more dangerous. One final thing on the Islanders, randomly, you guys made me guess how many games Robin Leonard would play, and I guessed 48, and he played 46. So, and he had an amazing year, an amazing year.
Yeah, do you think that he's worth like paying big money and big term for? Like, what would you do if you were an NHL GM and you had this Robin Leonard season? Now you have to decide if you're going to re-sign him or not.
Well, it's tough. I mean, generally my rule is don't pay goalies and don't overreact about one season, but he was so good, and I do think it's more real than not. Especially, I don't think he's going to have a crazy like north of 930 save percentage again, but it's clear that they really tightened things up defensively, and he was a good fit there. And assuming they can find the right balance between term and salary, I'd be perfectly okay bringing him back. And I'm buying him as a top fantasy goalie again heading into next year.
Nice. Okay, I'll throw a name at you for the winger, by the way. What do you guys think about Matt Zuccarello? How about he could come in and be the new Anders Lee? Is that possible?
I like it. Although I'd like a bit. I'd like a guy who kind of profiles as more of a shooter there. Right. But Zuccarello's obviously very dynamic, and he looked great to end the year for Dallas. So I think anyone at this point would represent a massively much needed talent infusion for them.
Oh, I have the answer. Okay, they should offer sheet Mitch Marner. He should be the guy. That would be great.
That would be the funnest outcome for sure. Okay, Rangers. Well, this is really exciting because obviously now they added Jacob Trouba, they added Capo Caco, we have Kravtsov coming overseas. They have a ton of young talent now. I don't know how you guys want to take this in terms of, I guess the most interesting thing is from a deployment perspective, whether it's clear they're probably going to keep Zibanejad and Kreider together. I guess whoever plays with those guys on the wing is going to have the biggest upside here. And hopefully it's Buchnevich. I'm still buying on him. I know he had, didn't live up to the sleeper hype that or the breakout hype that we were praising on him last year, but still 21 goals in 64 games on a per minute basis. He was great. I think if he gets that full-time role with them and then they let some of those younger players play in softer competition in the middle six, I like that fit. And so I would still invest in Buchnevich heading into next year.
Buchnevich did what we hoped he would do when he was given the opportunity to do it. It reminds me, we talked about Jason Spezza last week and hoping a coaching change was going to help him find his game. But didn't happen for Spezza. He didn't get the help we hoped a new coach would give him. Same thing for Buchnevich, except the difference is Spezza's at the end of his career and Buchnevich is likely just at the beginning, but he really did not get any more opportunity, just 9 more seconds per game over the prior season, less time on the power play, fewer power play points to go with that. And he did pick up those 20-odd goals on a 17% shooting percentage, which I would love to be his natural shooting talent. I would have to see him take more shots to know, which we just did not have the opportunity to see in New York. So I'm a little concerned that he's going to be playing again for the same coach on a deeper team, and somehow we're looking for him to get more opportunity. The one other possibility is that Chris Kreider doesn't start the season as a Ranger. I seem to see a lot of rumblings about that. I can't remember if they're at all from credible sources or not, but that would work in Buchnevich's favor.
I just kind of feel like with the Rangers right now, and I know Kako's coming in, maybe they even signed Panarin, which would be fantastic, and that changes everything. But for now, it still kind of looks like he's got to be on the Zibanejad line if he wants to be a big producer. Like, Mika Zibanejad had this amazing breakout, 74 points, and like people playing with him were doing well, and just Buchnevich kept on being taken away, or he had Zibanejad taken away from him, and last season it wasn't a good place to be. Like, the second line wasn't as good, or the third line obviously wasn't as good. Next season, the line combos on the Rangers are going to be so interesting. I'm really excited to see. The one thing I know for sure is that we don't have to talk about Kevin Shattenkirk now on the top power play. I remember, Brian, that was one of your big swings and misses from the offseason. Of course, there were lots of hits, but yeah, we have to mention that we really blew it with Kevin Shattenkirk because he stunk.
I'm on the free Shattenkirk train right now because he had a pretty good season last year, except for the points, which I know is all that matters for fantasy purposes. But I really don't see it being a whole lot of his fault. Like, okay, he wasn't the player, especially on the power play, right, that he had been in St. Louis, and that's where we called him elite as an offensive producer. So the power play production still didn't look like he should have had a big. I think he should have had a bigger role, but he didn't make it impossible for the Rangers to use him there, and so they didn't. They preferred to use Neil Pionk there for a large chunk of the season. But at even strength, he still looks good. I still think he has something to give. I would love to see a team commit to him as their number one guy for half a season and see where that goes. It feels a lot like, and maybe this isn't a great example because Dan Boyle was signed by the Rangers to quarterback their power play and was run out of town, and the opportunity was taken away from him. And in the end, his career never picked up again. So I don't know if that proved the Rangers right, or they just did such a great job of pushing him down. And so I worry that we're going to see the same narrative happen for Shattenkirk.
I mean, Boyle was just so old at that point, though. I think that was the biggest role. I like this. I mean, this seems to be a really fun team to watch. You're right. The depth chart and how it shakes out is going to be something to watch in the preseason. They have a lot of wing talent, and they have a lot of young players, exciting players that are going to be playing on those wings. Down the middle, Zibanejad is really the only player I trust right now. I like Hedl a lot moving forward, but last year they didn't really trust him to play down the middle. He was more of a winger for them as well. I think they're going to have to bump him there because I don't know how much you're going to get from guys like Ryan Strome. And so I think that it's going to come down to that, whether they can get a second and a third line consistently going with some of those wingers and someone steps up down the middle. So it's something to watch, but I think they're going to be really fun, and I can't wait to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, me too. Dimitri, can I just really quickly plant my flag and say I disagree with Brian? I think Kevin Shattenkirk is totally done, and like his minutes were low, and just forget about Kevin Shattenkirk. Guys, don't listen to Brian.
No,
he's wrong.
You can forget about him in New York, but I would love to see him go elsewhere to a team that needs him and can use him.
Nah. Okay.
There's only space in Elon's heart for one man, and his name is Kyle Palmieri.
And
No,
Jacob Trouba,
I love
actually.
Jacob
Elon is a
Trouba.
huge Jacob Trouba guy.
Yeah, well, we'll leave the Trouba analysis for your guys' preseason conversations. The Senators. I know it's easy to make fun of this team, and they certainly give us plenty of opportunity to do so. But one kind of rule that I have for fantasy is sometimes these really bad teams are a land of opportunity because there's just no one kind of occupying space on the depth chart for the most part. So for unheralded, unproven names, there's an opportunity there to step in and get heavy usage and play on the power play. And especially if they're going to be losing a lot of games and getting blown out, there's going to be plenty of times where there's just garbage time and they're just soaking up easy minutes like that and getting, empty calorie scoring that doesn't really matter how you get it for us from a fantasy perspective. And we saw last year with guys like Shabbat and Tkachuk and Duchesne and Stone before they were traded. All those guys were having massive offensive seasons. So obviously now without Duchesne and Stone, it'll be a bit tougher to be that good offensively. But I'm curious, especially with some of these younger names like Drake Batherson, who had an awesome AHL season, Alex Formenton, who has tons of speed and had good major junior numbers. If these guys can step up in some of those forward roles and get you kind of surprisingly good offensive production, considering what you're going to probably have to pay for them at the start of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we did kind of get some things right when we talked about Ottawa at the beginning of the season. Like we were saying, yeah, Brady Tkachuk might get the opportunity to play like big minutes with good players. And we also said Thomas Chabot's going to get this great opportunity on the top power play. And it was looking really well. And McBrien called it that Duchesne and Stone, even though they're on the Sens, they're still really good. And like all that worked out really well. Then Duchesne and Stone left and Thomas Chabot and Brady Tkachuk kind of ended the season not that great. So now it's interesting to try to project these guys for next season, their sophomore seasons, without Duchesne and Stone.
Well, that's the thing about Tkachuk. I think I have to admit he had a way bigger immediate impact than I thought he would. He looked awesome, and I think the numbers were certainly concerning towards the end of the season. But just in terms of watching him play, I just thought he was way better than I thought he'd be, and especially like generating shots and just being constantly involved in the play. But as you mentioned, he played 515 5-on-5 minutes with Mark Stone, and then after the deadline, he only played 100 or 5 minutes without him, and they were really bad. And all of their numbers completely just plummeted and fell off the face of the earth. And, in year two, I imagine he's going to be even better, and we'll see who he's going to be playing with. But that does raise a bit of a red flag in terms of how much of it was Mark Stone just being one of the best 5-on-5 players in the league and bringing him along for the ride, and how much of it was Brady Tkachuk actually being this amazing player right out of the gate.
Yeah, so I agree with everything everyone has said, and I'm a little more optimistic about Tkachuk being able to continue post Stone and Duchesne. Tkachuk, after they were both traded, 14 points in 20 games. Chabot had 8 points in 16 games. So both of them, I think, still carry value the same way that Stone and Duchesne did. And Dzingel, when everybody was like leaving Ottawa for dead, okay, but there's still some fantasy production to be found. Of course, the challenge for these guys, and they did it for a fifth of a season, is that they're going to have to do it alone. Bobby Ryan, Michael Bodker, Zach Smith, Peugeot, Chris Tierney,
Rudolph's Balsers.
Rudolph, like these are nobodies. You've got Colin White, who's an RFA right now, potentially penciled in as your top line center. So Tkachuk and Chabot are going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting with essentially a lot of attention on them. Although you'd hope that maybe Ottawa's opponents are like, this is going to be easy. We can give up a couple goals because we're going to score 9. So that would work, of course, in Ottawa's favor. That's the best thing I have to say about Ottawa. I'm going to throw out one. I guess this is more for our previews, but Anthony Duclair just re-upped for 1 year. And I wonder if he could, he had a bit of success. It didn't look terribly sustainable after coming to Ottawa. I just wonder if he might be able to get in on a little bit of this.
Nah. I'll just say nah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be clear, but it's going to be someone. I don't know if Brandstrom's going to step up on the blue line and join Chabot and kind of be a good running mate with him. I don't know. It's going to be Batherson or Formenton, as I mentioned. There's going to be guys here with, surprisingly good offensive seasons that are going to be putting up these points. I mean, when this team's playing 7-6 games against Chicago like they did last year, someone's going to get those points. So I'm optimistic about them from a fantasy perspective. I think they're going to be absolutely atrocious from a wins and losses perspective. The Flyers. So we talked a lot about their goaltending, and I think deservedly so, considering they used 8 goalies last season. Carter Hart, we had a long conversation about whether he was their best option out of the gate, and considering that he came up midway through the season and had a .917 save percentage in 31 games with +7 goals saved in the limited usage indicates that he was. And I wonder how different their season would have looked and whether they would have made the playoffs if they had just given him a chance right out of the gate, as opposed to the laundry list of guys they were trying before him. But we see time and time again, and maybe this is a reminder for us in future years when we're talking about young goalies, these teams are always going to err on the side of caution and conservatism when it comes to young goalies. He was literally their last resort before they finally called him up. And as good as he was, it just goes to show you how NHL teams think these days.
Yeah, I don't really get it. It's as if they think that these goalies are so fragile. If they bring Carter Hart up too early, they'll ruin him. And if he has not enough defense in front of him, he'll just all of his potential will be gone. It was really weird how that happened. But yeah, very optimistic about him for next season. And now Philly has this new slated defenseman. They've got Matt Niskanen. They got Justin Braun. I know people are making fun. What are your guys' takes on these guys? Because I haven't had a chance to talk to Brian about these signings. I know people are kind of making fun of the Flyers, but still they're bringing in defensemen to play in their group of defensemen. I don't know, something, their names.
Yeah, well, their new jerseys to sell, I think, is essentially how you can summarize their acquisitions.
Isn't
in what I
Braun,
think
aren't
their value really?
Yeah, aren't they supposed to be defensive players?
Well, Radko Gudas was a pretty defensive player too. I think they carry this the feeling and the assumption and the reputation that they're defensive players, but I still, especially you look at their contract numbers, and Niskanen's almost making $6 million, Justin Braun making almost $4 million. I don't think either one earns their salary, and I expect them to be on the middle pairing at best.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with Gostisbehere. He had a down season, and he's been in a lot of trade rumors. Provorov really fell back down to earth and had a tough year, and we'll see. I still believe the talent there, but I think the one thing you can say about those moves is it's pretty clear in the Kevin Hayes move as well that they're really trying to go all in right now with this core while Claude Giroux and Jacob Voracek are still playing as well as they are. So I commend them for that. I think I would have personally used that money differently, but at least, it's pretty clear that this team is trying to go for it this year. And I think we're going to be trying to be at least very competitive in 2019, 2020. Now I will say that one other thing we talked about a lot is our concerns about Wayne Simmonds. And, he's by all accounts, great guy, really fun player. When he's at his game, when he's playing at his absolute best, he's so fun to watch. He looks completely washed at this point, and obviously it's someone else's concern because he's a free agent now, and we'll see who pays him and how much they pay him. But it's funny because I felt like the tone of our discussion was we were kind of 2017, 18, he really struggled with injuries. We need to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt because of the track record, and he was even worse last year. And I think at this point, there isn't really that much left in the tank for him, even as a net front power play guy only.
Brian, did we end up solving if it was Wayne Simmons' mom that tweeted at us that time?
It was 100% Wayne Simmons' mom. If you ever want to mention Wayne Simmons on Twitter, I can't remember if we were being negative or what, but I don't think we were overly negative. But I think she's open to chatting. She never wrote back when we asked her.
Yeah, this is a mystery. This is a Keeping Karlsson mystery. If you message us at Keeping Karlsson, we'll show you the message that we're pretty certain is Wayne Simmons' mom. We did our best to try to investigate it, but anyways, yeah, I'm kind of over him as far as fantasy goes.
Yeah, well, he was conceivably the one thing I will say is that we didn't see him get in the top six. He had a variety of bottom six line mates in Philadelphia, like Scott Laughton, Jordan Wheel. The Wheel's a pretty good player, but that's maybe for another point. He was getting bottom six deployment. Nashville his deployment wasn't much better, and they didn't really seem to know what to do with him. But I am leaning more towards being overly or being not interested in him fantasy wise because his rate stats didn't really bounce back the way we'd hoped. So Wayne Simmons, we'll have to see where he lands and what the team who signs him, what their plan is to use him for. But I'm not overly optimistic.
Okay. Yeah. Quick question, Dimitri, who do you think of all the goalies who played on Philly last year, aside from Carter Hart, which of them, if any, will do something decent with the rest of their career? Is there anyone? Talbot, Elliott,
Neuwirth, and Lyon?
No, none of the above.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, the Penguins. So our big kind of theme on their section was who's going to be playing with Crosby, because we know that pretty much whoever plays with him, it's going to be fantasy gold. He's the type of player that makes everyone around him better. And I think in the preseason combinations, it was Jake Gensel and Daniel Sprong. And obviously Gensel had more of a pedigree heading in, so he would have been a higher price guy to target and draft. But man, he really exploded. He had 40 goals, 76 points, 227 shots. He his usage jumped all the way to 19 and a half minutes a game. And he did this all while not even cracking on the top power play for them, obviously, because of all the other guys in front of him. So I'm really curious to see, because Phil Kessel is a guy whose name's been floated around a lot. And if he gets moved this year, I imagine they won't get, a guy of his caliber on the wing back in a trade for him. It feels like it'll be more of a kind of future looking cap dump while they get interesting secondary pieces back. And if that's the case, that really presents an opportunity for Gensel to even sneak onto that top power play. And it feels like playing with Crosby and adding that power play usage to him, like, it seems pretty real that he could just constantly be one of the top goal scorers in the league for as long as that's the case.
It's crazy that we said in that episode, we think Gensel will get at least 50 points. I think that was my quote. He destroyed that. And yet, even if Kessel stays and Malkin stays, I know both of their names have shown up in trade rumors, and apparently the GM said they're probably going to be staying put. How much longer is Patrick Hornqvist holding on to that top power play spot? And even if he does, how many games is he going to be healthy for? Gensel still did get top power play time just from injuries. So yeah, I think sky's the limit. Jake Gensel is, but unfortunately now you're not gonna be able to get him for the steal that you got him in fantasy drafts last year. Now you're gonna have to pay top dollar to get Jake Gensel, but Crosby's still great.
Quick question for you guys. Would you prefer Gensel or Jeff Skinner heading into next year?
Ooh,
Gensel.
Brian, you go first.
I'm going with Gensel. I think this all depends on whether Patrick Hornqvist has fallen as far out of favor as it seemed through most of last season. And I'm banking on the answer being yes, he has fallen so far out of favor that he does not get on that top power play unit. It was clicking in the time that Gensel was on there. So I would love to see Gensel get full-time billing. I think Skinner would be the safer, more conservative pick, but Gensel has the higher upside if he does get that deployment. And I'm going to bank on him doing it. I'd say there's a greater than 50% chance he spends, 80% of the year on the top power play.
But what's interesting? Sprong is the other guy we mentioned there, and obviously it came with Anaheim, but he had 14 goals and 110 shots in those 47 games with them, and actually was pretty productive. So we weren't totally wrong. It just didn't happen the way we thought. But, in terms of looking forward to next year, in terms of who that third guy is going to be that's going to play with Crosby and Gensel, it's really fascinating because this past year, obviously, it was kind of a rotating door. Brian Rust played there for a while and was amazing. Dominic Simone, who's one of my arch nemesis because he cost me a ton of money in daily fantasy, is also playing there as well. They just traded for Dominic Cahoon. He could consider one factor in there. But the name that I really think has the highest upside is Jared McCann. He looked great with him towards the end of the year. I think the only risk with that is that maybe they view him as too valuable as a potential third line center that gives them more depth, and maybe they'll prefer to play him that way. But just kind of putting Crosby with shooters, with Gensel and McCann as his two shots, and how good he is as a playmaker and a play driver would be such a fascinating fit to see for a full season. And with McCann's shot the way it is, the upside is really there if he can actually stick full-time 5-on-5.
And I think he can presumably play on that top line because now they have Nick Bjugstad to play as the third line center. And I think that's a good spot for him. I think we're done with Nick Bjugstad being a top 6 high producing guy. And so I think he could be third line center. And then you got Jared McCann. I like him as a sleeper for next year, right? But Brian Rust also had really great stretches. I think McCann got there because Brian Rust was injured. He had a nice run going and then he got hurt and McCann got in. And also there's Zach Aston Reese. There were so many guys that played on that top line. And probably the answer will end up being that it's just going to be a rotating roster of players playing with Crosby and Gensel again. But yeah, I do like your Jared McCann call. Obviously, we'll see what happens in preseason.
4 possible names, and it's so likely that the Pens will just do the most boring thing, which is cycle them all with Brian Rust getting the majority of the minutes. What's interesting about all this talk about who's going to be the third line center is I guess everybody's assuming that Evgeny Malkin is staying with Pittsburgh. I mean, I've heard all this stuff, but I can't buy any of it. Why would Pittsburgh have any reason to trade Evgeny Malkin as your second line center while your window's still open?
Yeah, that's silly. They're going to keep him. Okay, the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's so many players here to obviously talk about. A theme that I noticed in our 2 previews last year was we were spending a lot of time focusing on preseason lines and preseason combinations and how these guys were being deployed. And in a lot of cases, it fooled us and maybe we overrated it. The one instance where it really, really worked out was identifying Braden Point as Nikita Kucherov's center because he exploded, and especially on that power play. He had 20 power play goals, 35 power play points, 41 goals and 92 points overall, and it was just an absolute monster. And we'll sort of see with his impending RFA status what happens there and whether the Lightning make any more moves. But I assume that he will once again continue that role considering how good they looked. And I guess that's kind of my one big takeaway, that he finally ascended into that upper echelon status that we've been waiting for. And maybe that'll give credence to paying attention this summer and this offseason to see who's playing with who come the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get it right and sometimes you get it wrong. Like these preseason line combinations, I guess is the kind of thing where you don't want to spend too much time focusing on them because they can change. But like you said, there could be a good nugget. You just have to be ready to take a swing on someone and then let go quickly. But Braden Point, we knew he was going to be good. Like he had a great rookie season, but then this like amazing second year. And I mean, if you're centering Kucherov, you're already like guaranteed to probably get like 70 plus points. And then the fact that he's Braden Point, actually a really great player, is the reason why he got 90 plus. And like, do you see any reason to not expect Point to do this again if he plays on the top line and top power play with Nikita Kucherov?
Huge believer in Point. We said at least 50 for Gensel. I think we said, yeah, Point will get at least 70, which feels not quite as silly, but in the same neighborhood, right? But what Point was able to do, to my eyes, looked very much sustainable. And I don't think he was overly, of course, it helps to play with Nikita Kucherov a whole lot, but it wasn't overly reliant. And he's going to continue getting to play on the top Tampa power play, which is super stacked, and he can be a legit contributor. So I am all in on Point repeating what he did in 18-19.
Yeah, by the way, the big thing we got wrong last year is we called Tampa a front runner for the cup. And they were like they were like a first round sweep. They were clearly not even a relevant team.
Yeah,
yes, they were. Yeah, okay.
Here's my one big take. I know this is for more of like a next season's preview, but I'm calling it right now that the Anthony Cirelli breakout. He had 19 goals and 39 points in a predominantly defensive usage. He was awesome on the penalty kill, but I thought it was really interesting and really telling that as their season was going down the toilet in that series you mentioned against Columbus, they really went to mixing stuff up by moving Stamkos off of down the middle and moving him to the wing and bringing Cirelli up to be his center. And I think that moving forward with Stamkos' advancing age and sort of how he transitions into that next stage of his career, that's going to be a way to kind of prolong his longevity by moving him to the wing and taking some of that defensive responsibility off of him. And we'll see whether they want to just keep Cirelli in more of a shutdown role as their third center. But assuming he gets bumped up to the lineup, which I think is a very realistic possibility, I think he's going to have a monster season.
I love that. That's fun.
Yeah, I think the assumption here, and Cirelli's still young, right? He's 21 years old, and I've harped on him a lot for being just the sort of guy that your typical TV analyst pundit loves to plod because of, he plays physically, he plays the right way. But that obscures the fact that there might be some actual offensive talent there. And if he gets up to the top six, of course, that will hurt Tyler Johnson. Like that's the guy whose spot he's looking to take, and it seems takeable at this point, considering Tyler Johnson had several opportunities to produce with top talent by his side last season, blew them all.
And plus JT Miller's out of the picture, so there's openings.
That's the thing, because I assumed that Tyler Johnson was just going to be gone. I thought he was going to be a cap casualty and they would just trade him away this summer. But obviously with Callahan being placed on long-term injured reserve now and JT Miller having been moved to the draft, maybe it opens the door to retain him. I don't know. We'll see. But I do think just from an upside perspective, like late in your drafts, no one's going to be like reaching for Anthony Cirelli, but I feel like the upside really is there. And I think you'll know early on in the season based on how they're using him, whether he's going to live up to it right away or whether it's kind of a thing that's kind of more down the road. Yeah,
I feel like I'd rather go with Dimitri and take Cirelli over like Yanni Gourde or Andre Palat, where you kind of know what their ceiling is and it's not that high. I'd rather take a swing on someone and hope that he could, like in that last playoff game, which obviously I don't know how much stock you want to put in that, but yeah, he was playing with Kucherov and Stamkos actually, but obviously Tampa was just throwing anything they could.
But I think it is telling that like with their backs up against the wall, that's the combination John Cooper went to. Like you don't want to read too much into one game, but it also isn't just a throwaway game. Like it's clear that they were trying to what he probably thought was their best combination at that time. So I think that is fascinating. Let's do the Leafs and the Caps here real quick. They're like it's interesting because both of those teams, we'll start with the Leafs, they were obviously fantasy heaven, but it's like one of those situations where all of their top guys were awesome and there isn't anything really revelatory for us to say. I guess the combination right out of the gate of Tavares and Marner, it's clear that those two guys are obviously great offensive players. One's especially a shooter, the other a passer, but right out of the gate, the chemistry was there, and they were just so amazing together at 5-on-5. And we'll see if that holds true to form next year. If Marner still is in a Leafs jersey, and if they do play together. But I think as all systems go, like it's clear that these top guys are going to be once again amazing next year.
Yeah, I just think it'll be really interesting because now you have Nylander who will start the season with the Leafs because he was like a guy that held out and then he ended up being a disappointment, like fantasy wise. Obviously, Leafs fans weren't too happy with him. And we were talking about him being out and who was going to benefit. And, we were talking about Tyler Ennis in the preseason playing in the top six. He did well, actually, for his role while he was there. But now it looks like, Andreas Johnsson and Kasperi Kapanen, who are guys we also talked about, but we said like, we don't know about their opportunity. It seems like maybe these guys can find their way or like stay in the top six like they did last year. So I feel like the Leafs just have more and more fantasy goodness to give us because you've got Marner, Tavares, Matthews, Nylander, but then also you have Johnsson and Kapanen. Like there's a lot of players who could be really good. Like Johnsson and Kapanen, both almost 50-point players last year at the time they played.
Yeah, it's funny. On that podcast, I said normally I'd be all in on guys like Johnsson and Kapanen as breakout candidates, but I don't trust their role in this team because there's so much talent, and because of injuries and because of Nylander's holdout, both guys ascended to those roles. And now, considering the news that just came out that they're going to retain both guys on 3 and 4 year deals, it looks like once again, I think the shooting percentage is a bit concerning, especially with a guy like Johnsson. But considering the players they'll be playing with and how octane that offense is, I think low 20s goals again seems pretty plausible for both guys.
They seem to have both proven themselves to at least be quality top six complementary players, and there's upside for them to be more than that. So I'm very excited. I'm glad that Toronto's keeping them. That's the best place for their fantasy value. They essentially took Marlowe's money, right, and said, here, you have a little bit, and you have a little bit, and we'll keep you. And they'll probably get some of whatever. Anytime Marlowe took minutes or roll away from them, there's going to be less of that happening. So hooray for Monson, Johnsson, and Kapanen.
Monson?
Yeah,
I like it.
Here's
my big question for the Leafs for you guys. With Matthews, I mean, obviously he's an amazing player, one of the best goal scorers in the league. In terms of like how high we project him heading into drafts next year and whether he gets into that discussion for one of the top picks is interesting to me because, he's played 62, 68 games the past 2 years. We always complain about his usage, especially in the postseason. It was ridiculous how little he was playing. He did jump up from 1 year to the next. He went up from 18.08 per game to 18.32. His power play usage, he scored 5 power play goals the year before, 12 last year, and got about a half minute more per game on the power play compared to the year before. So the usage is trending up in the right direction, but just in terms of like some of the other top players and how we think about how much they ride their players like Edmonton with McDavid and Draisaitl or the Blackhawks with Kane and so on and so forth. I mean, we're even talking about Dylan Larkin's usage on the Red Wings because of how little talent they have. This team is so loaded and they are thinking ahead. And I know they're one of the more progressive teams in terms of sort of like data science and load management and not riding their guys too much. I wonder like what his ceiling is for actual usage on a game-to-game basis.
Yeah, honestly, I'm happy to defer to Brian for this one because I feel like you can make an argument that Matthews should be like a top 5 pick in fantasy. And I also feel like you can make an argument that he's like the 3rd best pick on the Leafs after Tavares and Marner. So I really have no idea.
He's someone who really might have come out a lot worse in his numbers last year if it weren't for Toronto having just one power play unit that they rode. Matthews was able to get 20 power play points in 68 games last season, compared to that to 13 power play points in 62 games the season prior, and paced for, just a few points more than he had scored the season before. And the line I'm trying to draw is that he didn't really do a whole lot more at 5-on-5 in his 3rd full season in the NHL. So where that would be cause for concern for some people, I'm not sure it is for me. I think this is more a case of, in 2017-18, he shot 18%, which is probably pretty high. He had 34 goals. In the 2 other years, he shot closer to about 14.5%, which like he's a really good shooter. Yeah. And I think that's reasonable for him to land. And that got him to about, a 90-point pace or just about, with that top unit power play time being a thing. Like being available in Toronto, because remember the year before there were 2 top units essentially that split their power play roles. So I don't know how much more forward Matthews can go with this ceiling of managing his minutes and having Tavares in the city too. But I think 90 points is a pretty safe starting point for him.
Yeah, he's probably, I think, one of the safest offensive contributors in the league. And I think obviously he's an amazing player. I guess, at the top of the draft, you just do kind of have to split hairs and nitpick and kind of go for the highest ceiling. And sometimes especially with a guy like McDavid, when you just know that he's going to be playing 22, 23 minutes a night and he's going to always be out on the ice, like that just leads to more fantasy success. So I guess that's kind of the one final point here. I don't know. Is there anything else?
Yeah, well, no, it's a great point. Of all the elite players who are likely to go in the first round or two, Matthews might be the guy with one of the lowest ceilings amongst them, and it's something to keep in mind when you are trying to, find that minor difference between the two guys that are available at your draft spot.
And you guys are saying because of time on ice, like
Yeah.
that's why his ceiling isn't high?
Well, I think like he's clearly an efficient scorer, and it's great for the Leafs that he is that, and obviously makes him a very valuable player. But I just don't think like usually when you're identifying guys that are great on a permanent basis, you go, okay, if they get a bigger role, all of a sudden that could lead to more counting stats. With him, I'm just not sure how big that role is going to get with their agenda, with all the other players they have there. And considering they've shown time and time again that for whatever reason, they're not comfortable to play him 20 minutes a night. Like I think at this point it could happen down the road, but especially under Mike Babcock, I'm just not projecting it to happen realistically heading into next year.
Whoop, dead air. I'm ready to move on.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, let's finish off with the Caps.
Okay. Well, we were talking about Nicklas Backstrom at the start of last episode, and I was asking you guys if you thought he would bounce back or if there was a problem because he wasn't going to be playing with Ovechkin as much because he only had 71 points in the season beforehand, and he ended up with 74 points, so he's still 70-plus point guy. But yeah, Backstrom is an interesting guy for me because it seems like Kuznetsov gets most of the even strength time with Ovechkin now.
Yeah, when you come to your draft, like he's just been around for so long that he's not going to be like the sexy pick. But I think he showed last year that regardless of who he's playing with, they have enough forward talent to spread out between those top two lines. And he's going to be in that sort of low 70s point range again, which is obviously very valuable. So it obviously depends on what you're looking for and what you're expecting. But as long as you go into it with those expectations that's what you're going to get from him, like he's going to live up to it. And he's a very consistent player. And I think he can repeat it again next year.
So Dimitri, are you...
for a second? I want to talk for a second about how, Dimitri, you mentioned Washington's scoring depth, and they can fill two lines, like a top six.
Yeah.
And I feel like that should be true, but last season it didn't appear to be, right? It was a really sad year for depth Washington scorers. Their fifth best scorer, and this includes the defenseman John Karlsson in the top four, was TJ Oshie, who had 54 points. And then after that, no one had more than 47 points. That was Jacob Vrana with 47 points, Brett Connolly with 46, Tom Wilson. So I feel like they have, three fantastic players in Ovechkin, Backstrom, and Kuznetsov, and then a pretty good player in TJ Oshie, and then guys like Jacob Vrana, who we feel could be better, but hasn't yet shown it.
Rana's going to be better. Like, listen, you mentioned him as having only 47 points. He played 14 minutes a night, and 4 of those points were on the power play, and he's probably not going to crack the top power play unit again. I'm not expecting that, but it's perfectly plausible to expect that as he kind of enters his prime here, that he's going to play more than 14 minutes a night and on a permanent basis. And I think it's real with the talent he showed. So I'm buying that his ceiling is much higher, and he is one of those players that is useful to kind of look at his per minute stats and go, okay, it's plausible that he could have an expanded role next year. And if he's all of a sudden playing 15 and a half, 16 minutes a night and keeps being that effective in the top 6, I think he could kind of get into that 60-ish point range.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And actually, when we discussed Vrana at the start of the season, I think a connection was drawn between him and Timo Meier. I think Brian that Timo Meier or Vrana was his like Timo Meier of the East. And
I'm gonna let you finish, Elon. I just want to jump in and say I still believe in Jacob Vrana, but it's weird that the Capitals haven't seemed to, playing him only 14 minutes a night. I was a big proponent of him taking Tom Wilson's spot in the top 6. It didn't happen. They didn't seem to want him there.
Why would they?
The 14 minutes a night.
Tom Wilson was good. He had a 52-point pace. He had a career year. But yeah, I do agree that if like Vrana can get more minutes, he could pull a Timo Meier and really have a breakout season. But I definitely would love it if he could be doing that with Kuznetsov and Ovechkin and not as much with, I guess, Backstrom and Oshie. Backstrom and Oshie aren't bad for sure. But like, if we really want to see Vrana get 60 plus points, I'd love to have him play more with Ovechkin. But yeah, he's definitely a guy that could be a good sleeper. We said he was a good sleeper last year, so it might be a little bit of us like, making the same mistake twice. But I think this could be the year for him.
Sure. I mean, he had 24 goals last year. Like, considering the usage, like that is very good. Like, I think that was a success story for us. All things considered. It wasn't Timo Meier breakout level, but I think he showed us enough last year to believe that there's like another couple steps coming here to reach. I don't think he's going to be as good as Timo Meier was this year, but something better than he showed this year.
I'm with you.
Let's give us the thumbs up.
Who has the higher ceiling? One name we haven't mentioned yet, like Verana is our next big hope on Washington. Andrei Burakovsky, are we done with him? He's just 24, but another really unimpressive season where, like Verana, he just didn't seem to be able to convince his team to fully buy in on his talents. Like they'd rather play Brett Connolly over, who had a decent season, by the way, but Burakovsky still seemed to be on the outs.
Well, I think Connolly is a free agent, and I imagine he will probably get paid by someone. But I with Burakovsky, I think news came out that they're not going to qualify him or whatever, and it sounds like he could be gone, and that is surprising considering what he's shown early in his career and the age he's still at. But I'm still relatively believing on him, I guess. I thought he was going to be an actual star, and at this point of his career, it hasn't happened, so you need to temper your expectations. But in a new city and in a new role and a team that actually lets him play, it's plausible that he could realize that potential.
Yeah, maybe he'll be the Dylan Strome of next season, a new environment, and everything works out well for him.
All right, guys, let's get out of here. Let's put a pin in this conversation. I'm glad we went back and did this. It was very kind of instructive and sometimes interesting, sometimes sad in the cases of the Valentin Zykov discussion to go back and listen to all this stuff. And I did feel like it was a good learning experience, and I think there's certain things you take from that to apply to our projections and expectations heading into next year. Plug some stuff. Where can people find you guys? What are you working on, and what can we expect from you this summer?
All right, thanks. Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I would love to now take the lessons we've learned and try this again at the start, in September of next year, or I guess this year, and try to predict what's going to happen next year. But yeah, so if you like hearing Brian and I, normally it's just the two of us. We normally don't have a third wheel here, even though it's great talking to you, Dimitri. But yeah, you could check us out. We're the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy
Hockey. Called Dimitri a third wheel.
On my own podcast.
It's great to have him here.
On my own podcast. Thank you for having me on the PDOcast, guys.
You know what? The weird thing is we're not used to being invited on other people's podcasts. We've had guests on our podcast, so I'm more used to asking you to plug your stuff. But yeah,
the guests on our podcast are all third wheels.
Okay, so we're called Keeping Karlsson. We talk about fantasy hockey, but of course we try to just talk about hockey in general, which players are doing well, which players are not doing well. Do we think they're going to be able to keep it up in one direction or the other? And yeah, it's the summer, so there's obviously not a lot of fantasy hockey going on, but there's a lot to talk about, especially like right now is the time, right after we're done this conversation. Brian and I are going to record an episode to talk about all the trades and signings that have happened over the past couple of weeks. Then we're going to talk about the draft, and then next thing you know, there's going to be UFA Day on July 1st. We're going to talk about that, and then next thing you know, we're going to be previewing next season, and then we do an episode every single week where we're just talking about everything going on. So yeah, Keeping Karlsson is the name of the podcast. You could find us anywhere. Search for us and you'll find us. It's Karlsson as in
Almanac, or did I miss it?
I did not mention that.
Well, you guys haven't done it yet, right?
Yeah, we haven't done it yet, Brian. But yeah, we are going to be recording the world's second ever NHL audio almanac in a couple of months. Second ever because we did it last year, and that was the world's first ever NHL audio almanac, where we go over every single team and every single player, kind of like this, except more than just 4 minutes per team, and really break down what we think the fantasy value of every player is and and we come up with a point projection. And yeah, pre-orders are available. So keepingkarlsson.com/almanac if you want to pre-order. But just subscribe to the show and then let us tell you about stuff from there. That's number one.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we got to do this, guys. Let's check back in maybe kind of mid-late September as the preseason gets going and as we get some of those line combinations, so we can do some future projections for the 2019-2020 season.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Hopefully we won't spend as much time talking about the line combinations. Those are so juicy always late in the training camp. I want to see who's playing with who.
Well, it's also like all we have, so we're kind of clinging on to it and we're trying to get creative with it. So anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks to both of you for coming on the show, and yeah, we'll chat soon.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri.
Thanks, Dimitri.
Bye. Cool.
There we go.
I wasn't going to mention the almanac, Brian. I thought I'd like the teaser, get them to come listen to our show, then we tell them about the almanac. They're not going to buy the almanac.
It's a cool thing.
Oh, I see. It's like just talking about how cool we are. I don't
look forward to it. Yeah. All right, guys. I got to get out of here. I got a text about dinner while we're recording, so
no problem.
But yeah, I'm glad we got to do this. It was a blast.
Enjoy.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thank you.
Good luck with your guys' show. Yeah, just send me over the recording when you get a second. I'm probably gonna run the show on like Wednesday or something. So it's
perfect. I'll send it to you like late tonight, probably like around 11 or something.
Awesome. Well, have a good one, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, you too. Dimitri.
Bye. Okay. How you doing? Good. Great. You think it was good? I think so. It's kind of weird. We're having our post discussion, except like live. I think it works. I like it.
I think we're good. I think we have there's chemistry, you know?
Yeah, I just feel like it's like it would take practice to like learn when to talk so that we're not talking over each other. Near the end, I felt like we started doing it more where we were talking over each other. But
yeah, but we were pretty good at like one person not like backing off very quickly.
Yeah, ceding the floor. But now we can get
me actually.
Sorry. Yeah, Dimitri really was horning in on you all the time, eh?
Was that true?
I don't know. I don't want to take the blame.
Oh no, it was definitely you.
Okay, so are you ready to record a Keeping Karlsson episode?
Oh yeah, fresh as a daisy.
Do you want a break, or are you good to go?
You know, I'll just have a little sip of water here.
Okay, Prince Alex, thanks for sticking around. What were we calling Dimitri a third wheel on his own podcast? Oops, what did I say? I'm an idiot. Should I edit like the?
No.
Because I did a couple of edit points where like you and I like flubbed things, and there was like a dead air at one point. I could like cut that out.
So yeah, edit like but it'll be a fast edit. I feel like there were like 2 moments.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll do it. I don't know if it's rude to like presumptuously like I won't like edit content. Like I won't be like, oh, that thing Dimitri said was boring. I'll cut that out. That would be just he didn't say anything boring. Okay. So I'm ready if you are. You need to
yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Well, a quick one. Just cover everything. So we gotta wipe the slate clean because next time we come on, we're gonna be talking about UFAs. We're not gonna have time to talk about all this stuff.
True. Is that true? Is that true? Is our next episode in a week or 2 weeks?
Tomorrow. We're talking to Cam Robinson.
Okay. But
and then in 2 weeks.
Okay, because like technically, I guess we're doing 2 weeks. Are we releasing this one or no? The one we did with Dimitri.
No, he's releasing it, but we're gonna release this episode we're about to record.
Oh right, okay. So then that resets the clock on 2 because our schedule would have been.
I know. I messaged you about it because I was saying that like our schedule kind of sucks because we keep being 2 weeks behind all the big news.
Yeah.
So I wanted to catch up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Do you need a coffee or you don't drink? That's the problem. You don't you don't take any caffeine in. So
I drink coffee, but not after 10 a.m.
Oh God. Okay.
I'm just kidding, but like no, I wouldn't drink it now.
Okay, I'm gonna start.
Okay.
Actually, let me open up I feel like I haven't been doing all my nicknames for you lately because I don't have it like on the ready here. But
are we releasing this episode and Cam's episode?
Yeah.
Like as 2 separate ones?
Yeah.
Cool.
That's the plan. I haven't heard from Cam, actually. I know that he had some stuff going on, so I'm not 100% sure this is still going to happen. But with Cam, I mean, it'll happen eventually. But he hasn't said not, but I haven't heard from him. So anyway. Okay. Ready to start?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Why? Oh my God.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Yes! Welcome everybody to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the best fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by 2 guys with Eric Karlsson and their keeper pools. I say it so fast because it's fun, but I should probably consider the fact that there might be new listeners that have no idea what I just said. But I'm just going to keep going. I'm your host, Elon Dubrovsky, and with me, as always, is the maestro of the matchup, the player projection pundit.
Whoa. Whoa.
And with me, as always, should I do that whole thing again? Do you think I say it too fast? I like saying it fast.
No, I loved it, and my comment will be about it.
Okay. And with me, as always, is the maestro of the matchup, the player projection pundit, the Corsi authority, the ad drop ace, the IPP MVP, Brian Com.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another outstanding, obviously, it's going to be episode of Keeping Karlsson. Funny that you mentioned the speed at the start, Elon. I know a lot of people who, typically listen to podcasts at 2 times the speed. And we've gotten feedback that ours is like 3 times the speed, and even without actually modifying the speed at all. So if it was too fast for you, you might just want to set the speed for like 0.75 right now, and that way you'll be able to catch the rest of the show without having to rewind.
Okay, yeah, or just listen a couple of times. You'll probably get the gist. So this is an emergency episode of Keeping Karlsson. This wasn't a regularly scheduled episode, but I just messaged Brian. I was like, Brian, we got to do this because there's too many trades happening, and I don't want to get behind. We just released our episode with Dmitry Filipovich last week. And that was a lot of fun. And normally we've been doing every 2 weeks over the summer, but we're back right now to talk about all these crazy trades. Before we get into that, let's mention a couple things. First of all, we are presented by DobberHockey.com, top fantasy hockey website out there. They're breaking down all of the trades and the signings. And as UFA Day, July 1st is coming, you're definitely going to want to be checking out all of their insights there. Also the draft, like everything is there on DobberHockey.com. So they're churning out articles like nobody's business. And Brian, let's also mention, so last week we released that episode with Dmitry Filipovich where we recapped our discussion at the start of the year about the Western Conference. And you and I just recorded an episode with him for the PDOcast about the Eastern Conference. And he's apparently going to drop that around Wednesday. So you could either just subscribe to the PDOcast or check out keepingkarlsson.com/PDO to get that episode. We'll link that once it comes out. But with that, Brian, I've set the table. Are you ready to talk some trades?
So ready. The trade winds are blowing, Elon.
It's been a very exciting couple of weeks during the playoffs. First of all, playoffs are exciting. They're so fun and you're watching. But then as teams get eliminated, you care less and less unless you really care about the St. Louis Blues or the Boston Bruins. And then, then nothing happens. And then all of a sudden now everything is happening. And I've got my fantasy juices flowing. Like I really wanted to just draft today. And so let's break down everything that happened that got me so excited. And of course, we need to start in New Jersey. What a day they had yesterday, where they not only drafted Jack Hughes, but then they made a monster trade. They acquired PK Subban from the Nashville Predators for Steven Santini, Jeremy Davies, a second-round pick in the 2019 draft, a second-round pick in the 2020 draft. So not even such a huge price to pay for a former Norris Trophy-winning defenseman. But PK Subban hasn't been as good lately. So I guess that's what we're going to have to break down. It makes sense why his cost was low if you just want to go by, his career is going down a little bit. His point totals have been going down. So it makes sense that he's not worth as much as he once was. Like back in the day, his best season was in 2012-13. He put up 38 points in 42 games for a monster 74-point pace with the Habs. That was the lockout season. His actual career high is 60 points in 82 games, which he did a couple years after that, 2014-15. Then anyways, he got shipped to Nashville. He had 50 points in his first season there, then 59 points a couple seasons ago, but then only 40-point pace last season, even less because he missed some time with injury. But his total pace, if he would have played 82 games, was 40 points, which is really not great for someone like PK Subban, who we used to talk about back when, Brian, we started this podcast. We would talk about, like, is Erik Karlsson or PK Subban or like Chris Letang the top defenseman to own in fantasy for offensive production? And now we're talking about how PK Subban just put up a 40-point pace. So, like, what happened there? Like, was it mainly just a lack of power play time? Obviously, he had to share that time with Roman Josi. Or does it has to do with, like, he's 30 years old? Maybe he's not, like, as good as he used to be. Of course, now he goes to New Jersey, where we expect him to be the top power play D-man, because who else would it be? And actually, I'll get to a name in a second. But, playing with some exciting new players, including Jack Hughes and hopefully a healthy Taylor Hall. So I'm really excited to hear, what do you think about PK Subban? Is this going to be the start of a huge resurgence for him? Or is he now closer to the 40, maybe 45, ceiling 50-point guy that he's shown over the past season?
Nah, PK Subban is in the best possible place right now, which is really anywhere. It's not specifically New Jersey, but it's anywhere where he is the guy, and there are at least 2 or 3 quality pieces for him to play with on the top power play. And that's exactly what he's found in New Jersey. Forget the days of trying to grab a flyer or a spot start of Damon Severson or Will Butcher or even Andy Green to try and pick up a power play point from the Devils' power play quarterback, because it is PK Subban all the way.
Sorry, Brian, you had an internet glitch.
And I have internet glitch.
Brian, sorry. Can you say forget about picking up like those players?
Oh man, I got so much further than that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you got glitchy.
Okay. Forget about having to take a flyer on someone like Damon Severson or Will Butcher or even Andy Green to try and get a power play point out of a New Jersey Devils defenseman. PK Subban is there, and he is going to be fantastic in the role. I have every bit of faith that PK Subban can return to the 55, 60-point range that he was often in Montreal in his glory days. Yes, he's 30 years old, but look, he's going to get a rollback that he straight up just hasn't had since his Montreal days. In Nashville at 5-on-5, Subban was scoring more goals, but getting fewer assists. And I just want to point out that I don't necessarily know that that's his fault. that he wasn't getting assists, and that was keeping his point totals low. Subban had seen a couple pretty sad years recently in on-ice goals for per 60 minutes. So there was essentially, when I'm saying that, I'm saying there was less scoring for Subban to assist on. And also, of course, he was playing less minutes with which he can use to get an assist. He's playing about one fewer minute of 5-on-5 in Nashville than he was in Montreal by the end of his time as a Predator. But of course, the real hurt for Subban's totals were on the power play in Nashville. First, like, he was never the guy in Nashville the way he was in Montreal, right? He averaged 2.5 power play minutes per game last season as a Predator, compared to close to 4 minutes a game when he was a Montreal Canadian. And the other reason why Subban's power play production faltered as a Predator was because the power play didn't run through him while he was on the ice the way it did in Montreal. The numbers show that Subban was less involved in putting pucks on net, though to be honest, it didn't really slow him down because his point rates, I'm actually going back and forth here because I'm saying he didn't take as many shots quarterbacking the power play. Like, his slapper is the big thing, right? And he was doing that just nonstop when he was quarterbacking the Habs power play. Quarterbacking the Preds power play, he had a different role, which he still found success with. Like, his points per 60 rates in Nashville on the power play were better than in Montreal.
Brian, you glitched again. You glitched again. It disappeared. You said his points per 60 rates were better in Nashville. Can you go from there?
Okay. But his points per 60 in Nashville were actually better than in Montreal. But of course, having less time to play in Nashville on the whole worked against PK Subban. So needless to say, I'm very excited for him to have all the time in the world to work with. Remember when he was with the Habs in his last 2 seasons in Montreal, Subban averaged 26 minutes of ice per game, 24 minutes in his next 2 seasons in Nashville, and not even 23 minutes in Subban's most recent season as a Predator. So I am really pumped for PK Subban to be in a new place on a team that just wants to use him. This is your role, PK. Go just slap away on the power play.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. I love PK Subban as a player, and I love watching him play, and everything he does in the community season. He's a great guy. I'm really happy for him. I think this is great for the New Jersey Devils. I do wonder though, I'm curious how high do you think he's going to go in terms of points? Because I do worry that maybe he's going to be a little overrated at this point, because everything you're saying makes perfect sense, and everyone's going to be thinking, okay, now he's going to be on the top power play. No competition, playing with Taylor Hall, playing with Jack Hughes, Palmieri, Hischier, great players to play with. It looks like everything is so great, but at the same time, we got a tweet right after the trade asking if this person was drafting in a cap dynasty league, and he was asking if he should take Erik Karlsson or PK Subban. And I know Erik Karlsson makes a lot more money, but it just made me think maybe he's going to be a little overrated now, and people are going to go too nuts for him. He still is 30 years old, and he did only have 40 points last season. So I expect him to improve from last season for sure, and maybe even get to 55, 60. But I would are you thinking he's going to get back to the 74 point pace that he was putting up in Montreal?
First off, last season, his pace was 40 points. He only had 31 in 63 games. 2 seasons ago, Subban had 59 points. So,
yeah. But that was with a Nashville team that was so good. Is New Jersey as good?
I don't know that New Jersey is as good, but they have Taylor Hall, Kyle Palmieri, Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes coming in who might be able to contribute. And then you've got some decent depth in Miles Wood and Blake Coleman. Subban has what he needs to produce in New Jersey. I think he's most often going to be on the ice with scorers, so it doesn't really matter what the rest of the team looks like.
So give me a number. I just want to get a sense of what you're talking about.
55 is where I'm starting with Subban. I have big dreams for him next year. His career high, and this is just total, right? Not pace, was 60 points back in 14-15. The next season, he had 51 points in 68 games, which I guess would have put him close to 60 points, but not quite. His highest pace was back as a 23-year-old in the lockout shortened seasons. We never really got to see if he could keep it up over a full season. Yeah. But I think Subban can return to close to the peaks of his career with at least 55 points next season.
Okay, I don't really speak Briner. I'm trying to learn. When you say you're starting at 55, what's your we're going to do an almanac. Obviously, you don't have to stick with what you're going to say. What do you think your number is going to be? Are you going to put 55? Because to me, that seems reasonable. If you're going to say 65, then I start to wonder if maybe you're going a bit high.
I'm going to go 58.5.
Okay, yeah, okay, I'm good with that then. I agree with you because you say like I say 55, and then you say like how amazing it is, and it almost to me seems like you're saying two different things. Because 55 seems like reasonable to me, but nothing like outlandish. Like a lot of defensemen have been getting higher point paces than 55 over these past couple of seasons. So like that's nothing too special. That's what you'd expect from a top power play defenseman.
How many defensemen last year? I'm going to look this up while I ask the question. How many defensemen do you think last year scored more than 55 points?
I mean, I would guess maybe like 8 to 10. Like Philip Gustafsson had 60. Like Jacob Trouba only had 50, right? Thomas Chabot, I feel like, had 55. Like there were a lot of names, and then like obviously the obvious guys like John Karlsson and Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns, and I don't know. So tell me the final number.
Or well, I'm still looking it up, but I guess the trouble is that we can't account for pace the way I'm looking it up. So keep that in mind. But the number of defensemen with more than 55 points last year, there were 10 of them.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's not that special.
Are you what? There are 10 guys who have 55 points or more, and you don't think that's special?
I think we're agreeing, and I don't even know what we're arguing about now. Like, the way you're talking about PK Subban, it sounds like you're saying he's going to be like a top fantasy defenseman, but now it sounds like you're more saying you think he's going to be just shy of the top 10. So that's what you're thinking, like 55-point guy. Okay, we're on the same page. Let's talk about another guy who I'd be curious to know if you have higher or lower than Subban, and that's Roman Josi, who all of a sudden no longer has to fight PK for that PP time in Nashville.
Just for the record, in 2017-18, I'm interrupting you completely. There were 12 guys who had 55 points or more. I don't know if that supports your point or mine.
I mean, it's just making it seem less special. So it makes me like you said, Subban, 55 points. This guy's amazing. He's so good. He did this. So I'm going to say 55 points. And the way like the number doesn't match the enthusiasm, I guess, because to me, 55 points, I think, it's like, yeah, it's good.
So I think relative to Subban, to you asking me, is Subban, like he had a 40-point pace last season. It's very reasonably enthusiastic. Relative to PK Subban, it's a very enthusiastic projection.
Yeah, he used
but relative to league, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and but back when he was on the Habs, he was getting 60 plus every single year, and even had approached 75. But okay,
was he though?
Like pace, he was approaching 75-point pace.
Are you sure about that?
I said that at the start, right? Oh man, the people I hope are enjoying this mini episode that's going a bit off the rails. He had 38 points in 42 games in 2012-13 for a 74-point pace. Yes. Yeah,
but so I referenced that, but outside of that, he's paced for 62, 60, and those are his top 3 paces.
Yeah, that's what I said. Oh my God.
Okay, but so we're on the same page. I don't know, the way you put it, it sounded like he had like all these huge seasons where it's like, yes, PK Subban, 60-point guy.
Yeah, but you said 55. Okay, can we move on? Roman Josi. So he also, before PK Subban was in the picture, he was fighting with Shea Weber for top power play time. So this is going to be our first time seeing Roman Josi be the guy, I would think, in Nashville. Like maybe you could throw out a couple of names of Ryan Ellis, but I think Roman Josi is probably the guy. And to be fair, this guy, he's still been getting a lot of power play time, right? He had 58.3% of power play time like 3 seasons ago, then 53, then 56 this past season. So he's had a lot of time, and he had 56 points last season. It's already higher than your PK Subban projection. But now I feel like maybe Josi could be better. Also, that Nashville power play from last year, if I recall, wasn't very good. I'd hope it could be better. So yeah, do you expect Roman Josi to be the same, better, or worse moving forward with PK Subban out of the picture?
I don't think he'll be a whole lot better, but I definitely, like, it's nice to know that Subban isn't there nipping at his heels, although Ryan Ellis is, and I think that's something we need to keep an eye on. Josi, when Subban came to town, took a bit of a dip in his 5-on-5 ice time, but never really saw like a similar dip on the power play. He's been a 3-minute per game power play guy for essentially every year of his career in Nashville, except for his rookie season. So I really don't think this changes the outlook on Roman Josi's power play production or even strength production. I really am thinking that we'll just, again, see a pretty steady, similar season as in past years that we've seen from Roman Josi.
Wow. Okay. I'm actually really excited for him. I would be happy to project him for like 60 points, maybe 65.
Why?
I just think that now he's going to have more of a role. I feel like we've never seen Roman Josi not on a team without Subban or Weber. And now I feel like Roman Josi, they really are going to have to lean on him. I think he's a really good player, and I'm just curious to see what's going to happen.
I could see that even working against him.
Yeah. Maybe like defensively. So, well, again, this is like hot takes right after the trade. We're just throwing numbers out there. We're going to record our fantasy hockey almanac, audio almanac in a couple of months where we'll really sit down and break this down and try to come up with more, I guess, researched point projections. But my gut right now tells me to have like Josi around like maybe 63, 62, and Subban maybe like 58. That's where I kind of see him.
Wow. Okay. So definitely more than PK Subban.
Yeah, I think so.
I might want to, we'll see come almanac time. I might want to make a bet on that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that'll be fun. And it'll be fun to win. So then back to New Jersey, like looks like the one thing we could agree on for sure. And we've pretty much been agreeing, by the way, this whole time. We're nitpicking 5 points here and there. I think we agree they're going to be a better team. Like, first of all, they were going to be a better team anyways, if they just have like a healthy Taylor Hall. Like this team made the playoffs a couple seasons ago, like led on the back of Taylor Hall. And then last year it all fell apart after Hall got injured. And next year, not only do they have Hall, but now they have Subban. And that's great for the team. And that's also potentially really great for their starting goalie. If we could just figure out who it will be. If we recall at the end of last season, like there was Keith Kincaid at the start and Schneider was bad and Keith Kincaid was getting starts, but then Kincaid was like so bad as well. And then this guy, Mackenzie Blackwood, came in and really like stole the show. He was putting up really great numbers. He ended up with a .918 save percentage in 23 games as a 22-year-old. You know, you compare that to Corey Schneider, who hasn't been above a .910 save percentage since 2015-16. He only played 26 games last season as a 32-year-old. So I've kind of lost faith in Corey Schneider. Like maybe he could be a good backup, but I don't think he's going to be a starting goalie who could play a lot of games. So I think unless New Jersey goes and gets a goalie, all of a sudden we could be seeing Mackenzie Blackwood being the starting goalie on a playoff contending team, and that could be huge for his fantasy value.
Really interesting that over the last, let's see here, 6 weeks of the season, Blackwood and Schneider literally traded starts every single game. It went Schneider, Blackwood, Schneider, Blackwood, Schneider, Blackwood. Neither guy was injured. Both guys could play twice in a row. They just never did. And it's almost, I'm not 100% sure what the purpose is, because it didn't seem to matter also whether they played well or not. They just knew that they were alternating games. But Blackwood looked pretty good in his rookie season. He was able to put up a save percentage that was slightly above his expected save percentage, which is what we look for when we're trying to measure a goalie's performance. And on the penalty kill, he was actually really strong, which leads me to believe that the save percentage we saw from him, which was a 918 save percentage on the season, was probably a touch high. He really outperformed his expected penalty kill save percentage, and generally that's not a sustainable thing. So we could expect that maybe he's not a 918 goalie last year if those numbers had regressed, but they didn't. Going into next year, we're waiting to see exactly if he takes a step forward. There's, of course, the whole school of thought that goalies don't improve. So whereas Blackwood in a year with a normal penalty killing save percentage would be a 914 goalie, that's what we can expect next year, which would still be a great upgrade for what the Devils had in net before he came along, when they were just trying to figure out which of Kincaid or Schneider they could rely on. And they found out that they probably can't rely on either. I think Mackenzie Blackwood presents some really sneaky fantasy value next year. Of course, there's still like holes on that New Jersey blue line. Subban is just one guy. Don't forget they brought in Semi Vatanen, who helped last season, who helps sort of shore things up on the blue line too for any goalie.
If he's healthy.
If he's healthy, exactly. But there's still holes. So we'll see just how well, if this New Jersey team is deep enough to protect their goalie well. If they are, then Mackenzie Blackwood could be a good later round pick. We're going to be seeing that about a lot of goalies come September, though, right? Because there's a lot of guys who so many question marks remain, and the upside is there. Mackenzie Blackwood is one of them.
Yeah, just a name to keep in mind. We're not saying to reach for him in drafts, but if he falls, he could end up giving you good value. Also, Brian, what is the school of thought that says 22-year-old rookies who play 23 games don't improve? I feel like that's not
the school of thought I quoted. I said goalies don't improve is a school of thought, no matter, regardless of their age. And I've quoted this before in talking about guys like Cam Talbot and Martin Jones, when we're looking at 28-year-old guys having career seasons and trying to decide, is this something that's sustainable? Are we going to see them repeat this now that they're 28 years old and they found another gear to their game? And maybe there's just a later development curve for goalies. And there is a school of thought. I'm not sure how popular, I
don't like it. Darcy Kemper has been going against it these past few seasons. Anyway.
Darcy Kemper has never played for a team that protected him as well as the Coyotes did. I think that's a big part of it.
Okay, so we'll have lots of debates about goalies. I do think we could both agree that probably that school of thought doesn't apply to Mackenzie Blackwood's 23-game rookie season. Like, we don't know who he is yet. So
No, I agree. We can't judge any goalie on a 23-game sample. It's not to say he's going to get better or worse. It's just that we haven't seen his true talent. If I really wanted to be a stickler about the goalies don't improve thing.
Okay, fair. We don't know yet, but he has potential. Okay, let's go to the next trade that I wanted to talk about. This was about a week ago. New York Rangers acquired defenseman Jacob Trouba from the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for Neil Pionk and a first-round pick in the 2019 draft. I didn't look up who they took, but I don't really care. I don't really even want to talk about Neil Pionk. I just want to talk about Jacob Trouba. Brian, you know how much I love Trouba. I've been saying forever that I feel like he has a lot of offensive potential if he only gets a shot on the top power play. And just like PK Subban, I feel like now he's going to get it, unless you're going to tell me you're holding out hope for Kevin Shattenkirk, even though the Rangers are saying they might even buy him out, or we'll see what happens. But I feel like Jacob Trouba is going into the Rangers as the guy we're going to expect to be the top power play defenseman. This guy's going to play big minutes. And hey, even not having that role for all of last season, Trouba still had a career year last year with 50 points in 82 games. He obviously benefited from getting some top power play time with Byfuglien and Morrissey injured at different times. Still like only 40% of the Jets power play time overall. Now we got Trouba on the Rangers. First of all, do you concur that he is the for sure top power play guy going into the year? And as a 25-year-old, I know you're going to disagree, but call me crazy, but I feel like I might rather have him than PK Subban, especially like in a keeper league. I feel like the ceiling is super high for Jacob Trouba. We haven't seen what he can do when he's the guy. I think this Rangers team is so exciting. Like, they just got Kakko, obviously. Zibanejad had that huge breakup. They have all these other young guys coming up. Like, I feel like this Rangers team is going to be huge. And I feel like Jacob Trouba being the main defenseman at 25 years old, coming off a 50-point season, I could see him like getting up to 60, 65 next season easy.
Well, first off, you just spoiled a little bit of the PDOcast episode that we just recorded with Dimitri, where I stated my intention to begin a free Shattenkirk campaign, because I feel like the Rangers, another team could use Shattenkirk better than the Rangers have. But I think at least we know, I think it's clear that the Rangers have signaled their intent to not use Kevin Shattenkirk as their top power play quarterback. And I have to think that they traded Pionk away, who usurped Shattenkirk on the top power play, for Trouba, who can do the same thing. So yeah, I'm counting on him to be the power play quarterback in New York next season. I've always been a little shy, as you know very well, to anoint Jacob Trouba as like a brilliant offensive player. I've usually said, his role is to play a really steady defensive game and pick up 35, 40 points along the way, because he's great at breaking out of the zone, helping create controlled entries. And that was Jacob Trouba's bread and butter. My tune began to change a little bit last season, when we did see him get significant time on the top power play for him to really strut his offensive stuff. And he looked real good on that top unit in Winnipeg. That opportunity really looked good on him. In fact, he played almost 170 minutes of power play time last season, not all of it on the top unit, but he was the 5th ranked NHL blue liner in total points per 60 on the power play, behind Yandel, Krug, Karlsson, Hedman, ahead of Klingberg, Burns, John Karlsson. Of course, if I just say Karlsson, we know which Karlsson I'm talking about, right? Anyway, Jacob Trouba seemed to emerge as an elite power play presence last season. And that's when I decided that, Trouba, this offensive acumen can be unleashed, and it'd be really exciting to see it happen for a long time. Questions do remain, though, because he did finish in such good standing in point scoring for defensemen on the power play, thanks to an IPP that was 70%, which is unsustainable. This is all on the power play. An 11% power play shooting percentage, also something that may or may not be sustainable. But his 5-on-5 numbers last year also looked pretty good. He looks like a legit offensive presence. And I know this is something that you've been telling me for a long time, Elon, but at the same time, we've never really seen him be unleashed that way. And last season we did. So I'm very excited for him to quarterback a top power play. I don't know. I mean, it depends on who ends up as the personnel on that top unit for the Rangers. I don't know that I have him getting as high as Subban in New Jersey, but if I'm looking at a keeper context, I'm definitely thinking about it. It depends on how bought in you are that he will be the undisputed power play quarterback in New York for years to come. Because if he isn't, I'd rather have Subban. But if he is, then I'll take Trouba.
I mean, that's no-brainer for sure.
It goes without saying. But so what I'm trying to say is that there's still reason to wonder about whether he truly can be a high-end power play quarterback. But again, Neil Pionk wasn't the most high-end guy either. And the Rangers used him over Shattenkirk. So why wouldn't they do the same with Trouba?
Yeah, forget about Shattenkirk, I think. Maybe you'll prove me wrong. Alex in the chat room is pointing out that there might be competition for Trouba in like Brady Shea, or there's Fox coming up. So we'll have to see. I don't
think Brady Shea poses a threat. Adam Fox maybe, but I think he's more of a secondary guy, unless they want to save Trouba for a second unit and they don't think it's a big deal. But who saves their best offensive defenseman for a second unit? It's just not the way that Trouba has made his name in the NHL.
Yeah, well, I think I think he needed to be freed from that Jets organization that didn't want to use him offensively as much as they could have. So it'll be a really exciting season. I should also point out Alex here, who gives us lots of great content in our Facebook group as well. He did point out that Ty Smith could challenge PK Subban, maybe not next year, but eventually on the New Jersey blue line. This is a 19-year-old. He was the 17th overall pick in 2018, 69 points in 57 games with Spokane of the WHL last season. So he's a guy. It's not as if Subban just has this role and there's no one to compete with him. I'd say he and Trouba maybe have similar competition at this point. That's how
Alex in the chat with the very hot take that Smith is a better threat to the power play in New Jersey than anyone else is to Trouba for the Rangers. And I just like Smith, great. I mean,
let's be honest, Brian. We don't know much about prospects. Like, how many games have we seen of Ty Smith? We don't know.
None. I've never seen Ty Smith play. I'd barely heard his name before this point came up about, maybe he can be the top power play quarter. I would imagine Will Butcher still has a better chance at pushing Subban. Maybe Ty Smith has some offense vacuuming. That's great. But PK Subban is not in New Jersey to play on the second power play.
Not next season, but you never know. If maybe it doesn't go well. Like, it's not a guarantee that, I know the way everyone's talking about it, which is reasonable. It's reasonable to expect it. All the logic points to it happening, but it is possible that he struggles, or that power play struggles, and they make some changes. Maybe not next year, maybe in the future, as Subban is 30, so he'll be 31, 32, as Ty Smith becomes 19, 20, 21. So, not a guarantee. So next, let's go to the Vancouver Canucks acquiring JT Miller from the Tampa Bay Lightning for Marek Mazanik, who I didn't even realize was on the Lightning. Last time I remembered he was on, where was he, Nashville?
Yeah, he was there for a while. I think he was also in New York for a short
who cares? Basically, they got JT Miller for a pick, right? It's a conditional first-round pick in 2020 or something. I don't remember all the details of that. The main thing is JT Miller for fantasy purposes. JT Miller is now a Vancouver Canuck, and I know a lot of people are saying the Canucks overpaid for him in terms of what they gave the Lightning, and that's a discussion maybe for another day, because the Tampa was kind of cash-strapped. They need to sign Braden Point. So, you could make the argument that Tampa didn't have that much leverage, so they shouldn't have been able to get so much. Okay, so I just want to put that aside, unless you want to talk about the trade. I just want to talk about JT Miller as a fantasy asset, because I think it was on our episode last week with Dimitri, we were talking about who's going to be that third wheel to play with Brock Besser and Elias Pettersson. Now it could be JT Miller, right? And if that's the case, that could be huge for this guy's fantasy value, because we were just talking about how we're so excited about Elias Pettersson. He's going to be over a point per game, and Brock Besser is great. And if he could play on that line on the top power play, he could be huge. Of course, all that said, I remember having this conversation about Louis Eriksson going to the Canucks and being oh, this guy's going to play with the Sedins and be huge. They ended up toiling in the middle six, and still does to this day. So that could happen with JT Miller, but I think there is reason for us to be excited. Just like we were excited about JT Miller, by the way, going into last season, potentially playing with Kucherov and Stamkos on Tampa, and that kind of worked out, kind of didn't. In the end, he had 47 points in 75 games, 51-point pace. He was fine. That's where I'd expect him to land. That's probably what I'll project him for next year. But I think it's a real ceiling floor situation depending on where he plays. But he seems like a decent player, right?
Yeah, he's a decent player. I think he's talented. I think he's a good part of a team's top six. The really weird thing about JT Miller last season is that he actually fared better. At the start of the year, he played a little with Nikita Kucherov, and that's what we were really excited about. We're oh yeah, he could be a great third piece playing alongside Kucherov. He actually played worse in the limited time that he did play with Kucherov than he did when he played without Kucherov, or at least in terms of goals being scored for his team while he's on the ice. There were more goals. He saw more goals scored per 60 minutes when playing without Kucherov than with, which is a very weird effect. It was a weird season overall for JT Miller. He produced at higher rates with guys like Matthew Joseph, Eric Cernak, Slater Cuckoo, Cedric Paquette, and he was also very, very off and on. JT Miller had 4 very quiet months beginning in November that followed a hot start and preceded a hot finish in the home stretch. But if you look at his season as a whole, you'll see that half of Miller's points came in a third of his games, and those are the bookends of the season. So if you're like, oh, you know, better rush to pick up Miller, he really left you high and dry while he was on your team, and then you probably dropped him, and then he might have won the season or the playoffs for your opponent. It was a very frustrating season for anybody who did dabble in JT Miller ownership. I'm hoping that it is a more stable situation in Vancouver, but really in Vancouver, you're playing with Besser and Pettersson, or you're in trouble. Like you could be playing with Bo Horvat, which would still be a good spot, and I think Miller could produce from there, but it's not where he'd ideally land.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is going into next season, you're going to be able to get JT Miller a lot later in your drafts than you would have going into last season. Because if you recall, Miller did end the previous season really well on Tampa Bay, so his stock was pretty high. Now I feel like, you know, he's on people's minds, but I feel like you could get him late, and he could end up being one of those great draft steals if he does play with Pettersson all season. The Canucks also locked up Alex Edler to 2 more years, $6 million a year. So he's an interesting guy to project because he had a great season last year when he played. Like, he's always injured. He only plays 2/3 of the season, but when he played, he put up a 50-point pace along with all the hits and blocks and all that good stuff that he always puts up. It's actually his highest point pace since 2010-11. So it was a real nice season for Alex Edler. Obviously helped to have Elias Pettersson in the picture. I want to ask you if you think he can do it again, but I feel like it's all just a question of if he holds the top power play versus our friend Quentin Hughes, because obviously he's coming up and he's the future, but they did sign Edler for 2 more years at a lot of money. So maybe they plan to keep him there. Maybe they plan to use both. I don't know. What are you thinking for Alex Edler right now? Because it's a murky situation, I guess.
Right, massive question. Does Quinn Hughes get time on the top power play within the next 2 years? I guess, well, that's Edler's contract. I guess more importantly, this year, I see Edler's 2-year contract as sort of like a torch passing contract, where, you know, he'll start off being the top power play guy, and then slowly over the course of the 2 years, it'll be passed on to Quinn Hughes, or Quinn Hughes will join Edler on the top unit. Like, there will be a point, you know, it's going to start Edler and then eventually seesaw over to become more Hughes. I don't think it's going to happen immediately, though. So I think if you grab Edler in a draft, you still enjoy all that he has to offer for at least half the season. And I have no idea, right? Your guess is as good as mine about whether Edler holds that role all season. If I had to guess, and Elon, I'd like to hear your guess too. If I had to guess, though, I would assume that Edler is the top power play quarterback more often than not, and not just like, you know, 43 games instead of 39 for Hughes. Like, I see a good 65, 70 games of Edler quarterbacking the top unit.
I think it's the kind of situation where you draft Edler, and then maybe if he's doing really well, trade him, because it could be like a Dahlin Ristolainen situation where slowly but surely the young one overtakes that. Well, Ristolainen's not that old, but Edler obviously is. By the way, Adam was like, it's Quinn, not Quentin. We established in the last episode, Brian looked it up. Apparently his full name is Quentin Hughes, and that's how he was referenced on one of the sites that you were researching, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember what it was?
It might have been Elite Prospects.
Okay, there you go.
I had to guess.
All right, let's go to the Philadelphia Flyers. They've been very busy lately. So first of all, they traded a 5th pick to the Jets to get Kevin Hayes' rights, and then they signed Kevin Hayes to a 7-year, $50 million contract. So Kevin Hayes is locked in on the Philadelphia Flyers. And they also got a couple defensemen. First, let's talk about Hayes. He had 55 points in 71 games last season. That's a 64-point pace. He had 42 and 51 on the Rangers, and then was worse on Winnipeg when he was there after the trade deadline. Only 12 points in 20 games. So, you know, my classic question, Brian, like, which is the real Kevin Hayes? Is he like a 60-plus point guy? Should we be super excited about him? Or did he maybe overachieve on the Rangers, and what he did on the Jets is more what we should expect from him? I guess the other question that goes along with this is, are we assuming he's the second line center behind Sean Couturier? Because on one hand, that makes sense. On the other hand, why did they draft Nolan Patrick? Or are they just like already over him? Because this must be terrible for Nolan Patrick's like long-term fantasy value to have these 2 great centers ahead of him in the depth chart.
There's no way they're already over Nolan Patrick. He's still going to be a very important part of Philly's future. He might just not have to be the second line center immediately. And I don't know if that means maybe it's the third line center or he moves up to play the wing somewhere. Like he can play right wing also. So I wonder if that's a place where the team sees him being useful, because right now on right wing, they essentially have Voracek and then question marks. They have Michael Raffl, who we know isn't a top 6 right winger. And then they have Travis Konechny as an RFA, who they'll likely qualify, but Konechny himself can also play on the left side. So I could see Nolan Patrick hanging out on the second line on Kevin Hayes' wing. And speaking of Kevin Hayes, that was the original question, right? Do we think Kevin Hayes' production is sustainable? There was a time last year where we were totally bought in on Kevin Hayes, where we said, I think it was around the 30 game mark. It's like, you know what? We've seen enough. We believe that what we've seen from Kevin Hayes is entirely sustainable. And it was, right? He kept up his scoring all season long. He had more minutes than he'd ever had before. He was putting more pucks towards the net than he ever did before. He had better line mates than he'd ever had before. Essentially was a brand new version of Kevin Hayes that we saw last season that we hadn't gotten to see before. We were talking about Buchnevich really needing a new coach. I guess it was Kevin Hayes who needed the new coach in New York to see something in him. And while everybody was immediately shocked at his contract, because Kevin Hayes is like a boring name, right? He's not somebody that has a flashy reputation or anything. But when the signing was made, everyone was like, huh, what? What's going on? And then I sheepishly typed and then deleted a tweet several times, but then ended up sending it out hours later being like, I kind of like this signing. Like, yes, it's a little bit of an overpay. The Flyers maybe shouldn't have given him both term and dollars, been able to reel back 1 year from the contract or $1 million in his average annual value. But overall, I think Kevin Hayes can still be an effective centerman on Philly. I think there's enough forward talent for him to have 2 at least half decent wingers. And I like him for 55, 60 points next season.
Nice. Okay. So yeah, definitely someone to keep on our radar, and maybe him being around helps someone like James Van Riemsdyk bounce back after a bit of a down year. So yeah, we'll talk about all of these Philly guys in our almanac. Brian, have we mentioned, by the way, we don't have any advertisements this episode, but we are working hard on our planning to record our second annual NHL Audio Almanac in a couple months now at the end of August, and we're going to just sit down. We're going to take a week off of work. We're going, real vacation time, and we're going to, prep and then record a 31 chapter audiobook where we'll break down every single fantasy relevant player on every single NHL team. We'll have discussions like this and come up with a projection for each player by the end of it. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'd love for you to get on board on our pre-sale offer. So you can go to keepingkarlsson.com/almanac for that. And we're trying to bat around some ideas of ways to maybe make it even more appealing to be a pre-sale orderer. I guess we're not ready to announce it yet because we don't know. But actually, if you're in the Facebook group, I think I'm going to make a Facebook post sometime in the near future, asking you guys, would you like this as a pre-sale sort of perk? But also you could tweet at us or message us at Keeping Karlsson. Let us know what you think would be a good pre-sale perk, because we'd love to get you in there early, just so we're not nervous while we're recording it. Is anyone actually going to buy this thing? But okay, back to Kevin Hayes. Yeah, it'll be really fun to talk about him and all these other Philly guys as we try to break down the fantasy impact of him arriving, just like we did last year with JVR arriving. We have another piece coming in. Of course, now we have Wayne Simmons coming out. So yeah, it's a whole new look in Philly, and it's a really whole new look on their defense, right? Because they made a couple of other moves. First, they traded Radko Gudas for Matt Niskanen. So that's kind of interesting. And then they also acquired Justin Braun from the Sharks for a couple of picks. So Brian, do you see this as an upgrade or a downgrade for any of these guys' fantasy values, including, I guess, Carter Hart, who now, Philly's acquired a couple defensemen but shipped out Radko Gudas? I don't know if this is better for Philly or worse for them. I know a lot of people on Twitter are saying Philly is being really dumb lately and they don't like any of these moves. So maybe that's not great for Carter Hart. Overall, I like the idea that they're trying to shore up the defense. Of course, it's a big difference between trying and actually doing it. So yeah, any words on Niskanen, Gudas, Justin Brown, or Carter Hart to finish off our Philly talk?
Niskanen Gudas seems like a wash. Either guy could do what they occasionally do, which is catch fire, because they have this sort of big presence and can occasionally go on scoring runs. I really don't see that trade being anything meaningful for either team. Personally, I'd rather have Gudas, but it's not a huge deal for this year. And for Justin Braun, there are few defensemen out there who have had a demonstrably worse effect on their team's on-ice performance than Justin Braun. So Philly seems to see him as somebody who can handle a top 4 assignment, and I see him a bottom pairing guy at best. So I would not endorse that move and would not think it helps Carter Hart a whole lot, unless the Flyers think they're going to create a whole lot of internal competition for their bottom 4 D spots, and Justin Braun is going to be someone who helps push other guys to be better or get put. I don't know. Like these are things that that I imagine hockey teams believe, and I think they are true to some extent. But even that sort of competition isn't going to help Justin Braun contribute a whole lot to the team's defense.
Okay, yeah. Either way, like Carter Hart obviously is a blue chip guy that's probably going to be valuable, and Philly has lots of good young players to help make up for even if they make a couple odd moves. I think they should be challenging for the playoffs, if not next year, then very soon. I mean, the plan is next year, right? They didn't sign Kevin Hayes to not challenge for the playoffs. It'll be fun to see how it all shakes out. One more trade, not too much of an impact here. Carolina acquired Patrick Marleau along with a conditional 1st-round pick and a 7th-round pick from the Leafs for a 6th-round pick. Basically, it's like if you take Marleau, we'll also give you a pick, and that's what happens. The Leafs are able to dump Marleau's contract to Carolina. No point of even talking about the impact on Carolina, because I've been hearing that maybe they're going to even buy him out. He might not even play on Carolina next season. Maybe he goes back to San Jose. We'll have to see what happens. On the Leafs, I guess the big thing here is Marleau's out. Now they had some money. It looks like they've locked up. I don't know if it's official or not. I said they're reportedly close to signing Kasperi Kapanen and Andreas Janssen to 3- and 4-year contracts for around $3.5 million for each of them. So it looks like those 2 guys are staying. We'll find out what happens with Mitch Marner, but assuming he stays, I guess it's good news for Kapanen and Janssen, right? Because they show that they could be like around 50-point guys with the roles they got last year, and they're both young players stepping up. And if they're making, I don't know, they're making decent middle six money, but the Leafs have good players for them to play with. So I feel like there's no reason to not expect them to continue to be at least 50-point guys, and then maybe the ceiling's higher. Like Janssen got on that top power play and was playing with Austin Matthews at times at the end of last season. So if that continues for a whole season, then maybe he's more of like a 60-point guy when it's all said and done.
For sure. Anybody who gets a bump in their power play deployment will obviously be handsomely
Brian,
rewarded with their point totals.
Sorry, Brian, it glitched.
Janssen, Kapanen.
Brian, it glitched. Can you just go with the whole thing? It glitched right at the start.
Hey, I can actually hear you say it glitched for like 6 seconds after I stopped
so I guess
talking.
maybe we have a delay or something. I don't know. So I guess that's probably part of the glitch.
Do the almanac in French, by the way, is a very funny comment.
Okay.
I would love that challenge.
Yeah. So here, go ahead, start that over again.
Okay.
I ended by saying like, oh, maybe 60 points even for Janssen if it all works out.
Of course, being on the power play would help Janssen or Kapanen's value go even higher. For now, I think the best we'll do is assume that they continue to be complementary players in Toronto's top 6, and that's not to be any disservice to them. I think Janssen and Kapanen have both shown some offensive upside beyond what they've shown that there is upside for more production just by themselves, right, in their own talents, than just being hangers on in a top 6. So I'm excited to see if they can use that to help increase their point totals. They're still both young, right? Kapanen's 22, Janssen's 24. I'm glad they're both staying in Toronto. It seems like a good spot to at least find out if they have that upside, because even if they don't, their floors are not that low for as long as they're hanging out in the top 6, which it very much seems like they will. So I like them both to be 50, 55 point players, the sorts of guys that you draft towards the end where you're looking for somebody who is a reliable piece for your team, but who has upside to really show something new.
Yeah, I think that they're both really solid guys to grab at the end of a draft, if you can, like you're saying. So good call for sure. And yeah, now they've got all this Marleau ice time to fill. So that's more time for Kapanen and Janssen to maybe play. So let's move on to a couple signings to end this emergency episode. Of course, the big signing is our podcast namesake. Erik Karlsson decided to stick with the San Jose Sharks. So as you can see, I'm still wearing my Sharks hat, and I guess I'm going to be doing it now for the foreseeable future. 8 years, $11 million a year. Some people were saying, oh, maybe, these injuries have cost him a couple, million per year because teams are going to be worried. Sharks weren't worried. They gave him top dollar and top term. And I mean, why not? While he was healthy, he had 45 points in 53 games last season. That's a 70-point pace. And also, if you remember, he started with almost no points in his first few games. So, his pace was even higher once he sort of figured out how to play in San Jose or whatever happened to get him back on track. I feel like, I guess the big question is his injury situation. Like, he had that groin injury, cost him most of the second half of the season. Brian, are you, and now he had surgery in the offseason. Brian, are you worried about the groin injury and surgery, like, or his like ankle injury? I think it was before. It's ankle, right?
Yeah, there was an ankle thing. I'm not so worried. I'm really not. He was able to have a 70-point pace last year while I think he was playing hurt for a bunch of it. So I'm really, like, I know he tapered off in his production a lot towards the end of the season, but obviously I still have every faith in the world in Erik Karlsson. I think the Sharks will at least enjoy the first half of the contract that they've signed him to. I know there are health concerns, but honestly, I think you can use that to your benefit in fantasy and not buy in and be so scared away as everyone else is. I feel like there was a lot of talk in the offseason and last year about how his health is just waning and in rough shape, and like, you know, he's never going to have the same speed he once did, the same skating he once did. And while there might be a kernel of truth to that, it seemed very Chicken Little, like this guy is falling on Erik Karlsson, where I just don't believe that this is going to be like a really career shifting circumstance for him. So I'm still into him as a 70-point player at least. And I'm really excited that he's going to be sticking around San Jose, and we don't have to figure out who he's going to play with, what sort of timeshare there's going to be on the power play. We have a blueprint, a template for what Erik Karlsson looks like in San Jose, and it's still good enough to rank him as a candidate to be your top defensive scorer in the NHL.
Yeah, like, again, it's kind of like you're saying all the stuff that's great about him, then saying you like him to stick around 70 points. Like, again, like, he was much better. He had 33 points in his final 32 games with the Sharks. So this guy still has upside to be a point per game player. And I know with maybe some of my Karlsson love is bleeding through. We also saw in the playoffs he was getting points all the time. Like, we'll obviously see how things shake out with all of San Jose's free agents and all of that. But yeah, there's tons of upside. And I love what you're saying, Brian. If people are going to be afraid of him for potential injury concerns, that means you could get him a little later, maybe get him at the end of the first round, maybe even in the middle of the second round of a fantasy draft where defensemen, you know, are harder to get than forwards. That value over replacement can make Erik Karlsson super, super valuable. And it might be the 1 year in the next few where you could get him a little later than you usually can.
Yeah, I'm also going to toss in that at 5-on-5, for anyone like needing more data to prove that he's going to be okay. And I know like maybe he had some injuries in the postseason that he's going to need time to heal from, and that's the newest thing you're going to worry about.
Well,
but
he had surgery. He had surgery in the offseason. Yeah, that's what you worry about.
Yeah, sorry. But last season in San Jose, before all this happened, and I imagine he's going to get back up to roughly this speed, he had the best shot generation numbers that he's seen in years. He was averaging almost 19 shot attempts per 60 minutes, which is the second highest in his career and the highest since the lockout shortened season back in 2012, 2013. He also had one of his best expected goals rates, personally, his best shot on goal rates. Like, everything looks so good. And then you look at the variance numbers that, you know, will drive a player scoring unsustainably high or unsustainably low. And they were all low. His IPP was 42% compared with being up at 60% the previous 3 years in Ottawa. Although there is some attention that needs to be paid to how the Ottawa offense worked versus how the San Jose offense worked, and that Ottawa didn't score unless Karlsson was in it, while San Jose has a few other tools on the ice with Karlsson to help them get goals. And his shooting percentage at 5-on-5, less than 1%. In his career, he's generally been a 7-8% shooter. So you can count on more goal scoring from Erik Karlsson next year too. So you're right, Elon. When I said at least, I said 70 points, but I said at least 70. Like Subban, this is a starting point. Karlsson could be still a point per game defenseman. I am going ahead and making the assumption that this offseason surgery and injury situation doesn't significantly hamper him in any way he hasn't been hampered before. And I guess that is a bit of an assumption, but I'm willing to make it. I'm willing to give Karlsson the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, also, I guess you have to kind of give the Sharks a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Like, do they sign a guy to an 8-year contract if they don't have some assurances from his doctors or whatever that this surgery is going to make him perfectly fine? And, you know, it's not as if he had the same injury. Like, this was a brand new injury, this groin injury. So it's not, you can't just call the guy injury prone maybe you can, I don't know, but it's a different injury. So to me, it's a whole new thing, and maybe it could just be a one-off, and maybe he's totally fine. A couple more signings to close out the show. The next biggest one is clearly Jeff Skinner, who re-ups with the Sabres, 8 years, $9 million a year, big money, but hey, that's what you have to pay to get a guy who just scored 40 goals like he did last year, 63 points overall. That tied a career high that he actually set 2 years earlier with the Canes. In the middle of that, he had a down year with the Carolina Hurricanes, only 49 points, and then he got traded to Buffalo, and it obviously worked out really well for him. There was that stretch at the start of the year where he got bumped from the top line, but that didn't last, and by the end, he was making sweet music with Eichel, and in the future, it'll be with Eichel and Dahlin, Sam Reinhart, the future does look pretty bright for Jeff Skinner at this point. What do you think, Brian? Do you think he's going to stay a 35, 40 goal, 60, 65, maybe higher point guy? Is there room for higher than 65 points as Dahlin matures into the next Erik Karlsson? How high is the ceiling on Jeff Skinner? And also maybe is he overrated now that he's making so much money? I'm interested to see if you're going to go higher or lower than what he did last year for Jeff Skinner.
You're also trying to subtly and subconsciously and subliminally get me to agree that Dahlin is the next Erik Karlsson, which I know you're sold on, and I'm excited for the possibility. I'm not there yet. But Jeff Skinner, for his part, is looking pretty good. I looked at his goal scoring last year, 40 goals. It's not an easy thing to make look sustainable. But for Jeff Skinner, his 5-on-5 scoring sure looks sustainable. He did have the highest 5-on-5 shooting percentage of his career, but not by a long shot, right? And he had a couple years where he was really dry in Carolina and just could not buy a goal no matter how many shots he took. But he's been in the 12-13% range before. So what he had this year, which was 15% all situations, was not a huge leap and not something that I'm expecting to regress heavily. And I can also say that on the power play, his numbers looked pretty sustainable too. And I mentioned this on our PDOcast collabo episode, but Jeff Skinner only picked up 16 power play points last season. When you're playing on a top power play and you're a sharpshooter, and the power play is staffed with qualified personnel like Jack Eichel and a developing Rasmus Dahlin, I expect you to get more than 16 power play points. So yeah, Jeff Skinner had 63 points in 82 games last season. I think he can beat that next year. I'm going to start him at 65, and then I'll think about how much higher he can go. I think there's a lot of people who aren't buying in that this is sustainable, but consider me not amongst that group.
Yeah, and to be fair, Adam is pointing out in the chat room, he was actually on pace for 50-plus goals before a terrible fall-off. So I guess you could look at that either way. You could say this guy was a point-per-game player before the end of the season. Maybe you just write off the end of that season as just weird stuff. Or you could say, I'm concerned about the end of the season. I personally am about, what's his name? As I personally am about, say, Elias Peterson. No, not Elias Peterson. As I personally am about Elias Lindholm in Calgary. So I guess it depends which way you want to look at it. But clearly we saw that Jeff Skinner did show the potential to be a 50-goal, point per game guy. Obviously, that would be a really big thing to expect for next season, is to have to keep it up a whole season long. But it is possible. It's also possible that maybe we should be looking into what happened at the end of the year.
I'll also throw in a fun little note for anybody in faceoffs leagues. Last year, he won 157 faceoffs, his career high. Actually, in his first couple of years, he was taking 60 a year, but since then, 10 to 20 in Carolina. So he has some residual value there. If your league is a faceoffs league, you might want Jeff Skinner that much more.
Yeah, that's nice. Let's end the show. Normally, I wouldn't even bring up the signing of a guy who put up a 39-point pace as a forward. But Brian, just for you, because I know how much you love him, let's talk about how the New York Islanders have locked up Jordan Eberle for 5 more years, $5.5 million a year. I guess it's kind of a bargain. By the way, they also signed Brock Nelson earlier. I'm not sure if he brought that up. So the Islanders starting to lock in a couple of guys. But yeah, Eberle, such a big disappointment last year, 39-point pace overall. But he did have a 60-point pace the year before that. So which is the real Jordan Eberle? Probably somewhere in the middle. It probably depends who he's playing with. Obviously, he's better if he's playing with Matt Barzal, which he wasn't for a lot of the year, but then he was at the end. So yeah, what do you think about Jordan Eberle for next year? Is he someone on your radar for drafts, or is he maybe you could find him in free agency if things are looking good?
He's someone that you probably don't need to go reach for in a draft. A lot of it is going to depend on, who his line mates are, because you're with Matt Barzal in Long Island, or I don't even know who you're with. Last season, we also got really excited that he was going to spend more time on the power play, which happened for a bunch of the season. Unfortunately, he had the worst power play point rates of his career. I'm not sure that it was entirely his fault, though. So, like, there was some variance involved in why that was. So there's reason to, like, I don't think he's a 39-point player. I think he can be a 50, 55-point player. If he's given perfect deployment, I think he can be a 60-point player, but I'm not counting on perfect deployment for him.
Okay, that's fair. So, yeah, he's probably a guy you could grab with your last pick and hope for the best. Like maybe a couple of the other guys we've talked about on this episode. I would take like JT Miller above Jordan Eberle. Do you agree with that? I don't know. Like I'm trying to decide where to place Jordan Eberle.
Seems like a really good comparable.
Yeah, but Miller, I like his upside playing with Pettersson like a lot higher. But
and
yeah,
what about if you want to be on the real bleeding edge of NHL news, Elon? We have word that in the next couple days, William Karlsson is going to be signing a new contract. Did you want to talk about that for a minute?
I guess the thing, we've already talked about it a bit on Vegas, like with Nikita Gusev coming in, I feel like that's a big bomb that's going to drop on the Vegas top 6, and someone might get knocked off. It could be William Karlsson. It could be Riley Smith. Like, who knows? So he could end up not being as good in fantasy as he was last year. But I think last year was more realistic to what we can expect from him as opposed to a couple years ago when he was a 40-goal guy. I think he had like 26 goals last year. I haven't prepped him or anything. We ended up with like around 55 points. And
wow, so good. 24 goals, 56 points.
Yeah, so do you see that as sustainable, what William Karlsson did last season, if he were to stay in the same role in the lineup?
Yeah, I still think he might have shot like a little overly successfully. So 24 goals might have been a little rich, but he also wasn't picking up as many assists as I would have expected. And that's because of Jonathan Marchessault's dry spells throughout the year, which I won't expect to happen again. So I don't see Karlsson being bumped by Gusev. I think they like William Karlsson as being a center inside their top 6. I wanted to call him their top line center, but this is a team that also has Paul Stastny, and which line is the top line. But I think they like William Karlsson centering one of their top 2 lines. So I think his deployment is going to hold. And I think 55, 60 points is a good neighborhood to expect him in. So of course, this signing doesn't change anything about his outlook, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point. As a center, he doesn't have as much to worry about with Nikita Gusev coming in. So there you go. You got a 55-point guy, pretty reliable just because of that deployment. You say maybe he had a high shooting percentage, but, you know, he had a much higher shooting percentage the year before. So maybe he could end up landing somewhere in the middle. We don't know 100%. But yeah, I guess that's our episode, Brian. We've cleared the slate. We've gotten ourselves right up to date with everything going on as of now, which is perfect. Oh, wait, obviously we haven't, because we haven't talked about the draft that happened. But lucky for you, the listeners, we are going to be getting the great prospect expert Cam Robinson to come on the show and talk about the draft and all the players that got drafted. And I'm going to bug him about who's going to get points next season. And he's going to be like, oh, this guy's not even going to be in the NHL for a couple of years. I'm like, boring. And then he'll be like, no, this guy's going to be really good. It'll be a whole fun conversation. So we're really excited to talk to Cam. That should be recorded either tomorrow or we'll let you know. But the plan is for that episode to come out soon. And so, yeah. And then after that, next episode you'll hear from us will be after July 1st. When we discuss all of the exciting free agent signings. So a lot of fun keeping Karlsson episodes coming. Brian, I'm so excited that we're at this fun part of the season.
Finally, right? It's a bit of a dead zone between the start of the playoffs and the free agency period, but we're there. We're on the doorstep of stuff happening again. This is probably the most exciting time of the off season. Stick with us all through it to hear all about all of the fantasy impacts and angles of what is going to happen over the next 2-3 weeks. And we're all very thirsty for news, and we're going to dig in with all that we've got.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, like, everyone listening now probably will stick with us because they're listening in like the middle of they're listening in the middle of like dead time, just as things are about to start. So tell your friends, or I don't know. Hopefully we'll figure out a way for people to come join us for this ride. I had a really fun time talking to you about all this stuff today, Brian. I feel like this got me feeling back like old times during the season when we have things happening, we get to discuss it. So thanks again for everyone listening. Like I mentioned, we have our pre-sale open for our almanac. We might raise the price later. We might add some good perks. So check it out, keepingkarlsson.com/almanac to just get in on it and feel good that you're going to get it as soon as it's out. You'll be able also to listen live as we record the episode. That's one guaranteed perk you'll get by ordering early. Also, we still have our program going. If you want to join our patron only Facebook group and get access to our patron cast, we're probably going to record a patron cast sooner after July 1st than the regular episode will drop. So if you want to hear our early takes on the free agent signings, then you will want to be a patron for that. So it's keepingkarlsson.com/patron. Just ignore all the dollar amounts, the $5 a month that we normally charge to give patron perks. We say any amount of money over the summer and we'll give you all of the perks. So you can check that out, keepingkarlsson.com/patron, including a discount on the aforementioned almanac. This is probably very boring, so why don't we cue the outro music? Oh, you can also follow us on Twitter at keepingkarlsson. And Brian, why don't you read us the credits?
All right. This episode of the Keegan Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dauber Hockey and powered by our patrons. It was researched with help from Dauber Hockey, Frozen Pool, Dauber Prospects, Natural Stat Trick, Evolving Hockey, Cap Friendly, Charting Hockey, Hockey Reference, Hockey Viz, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, and Roto World.
Yeah, good job as always, Brian. And this is our second podcast recording in the span of 2.5 hours. So you must be very tired. So I'm going to let you go to bed.
I was just going to ask if you want to do another.
Okay. Well, we got to get invited to another show.
Okay. Work on it. Let me know. I'll be up for another 20 minutes.
Okay. Sounds good. And what should we do until then?
You should probably keep on keeping Karlsson.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for sticking with us this whole time. That was so fun. You guys really helped in the chat room here. Yeah, I agree. Miller over Eberle. I should have been like Eberle or like Kapanen or Janssen, as like maybe that was the more reasonable comparable. And I'd rather have the Leafs guys, but Eberle, I do agree with you, Brian. Like Eberle could still have something, but you know, nothing last season, so it's hard to get too excited.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about the Islanders too. Like I don't know that they have two lines.
Are you gonna say that there's an Islanders tax to pay?
I'm gonna say it just to tick off that guy who hated it.
I mean, they did really well last year, so obviously, according to this guy, he'll say the Islanders knew what they were doing with all those signings.
It was all Robin Lehner though, and their scoring wasn't there. So in a sense, I was right.
Well, Barry Trotz, that's how he set things up. He set it up for Robin Lehner to do well, and Thomas Greiss. Don't poo-poo him. Anyway,
sure. I wouldn't expect another season of 930 goaltending from Robin Lehner.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Like, it's so obvious to know. For me, it's like going to be so fun to just not draft a goalie in any of my drafts until like the last couple of rounds, and then I'll grab like Blackwood and Delia and like all these like random goalies, and then just hope that a couple of them say like maybe my last 4 picks will all be goalies, and just like take 4 long shots and hope for the best. But not take Leonard.
I feel like that's a really tempting thing to do, especially like you've got Mackenzie Blackwood sitting around. You've got Elvis Merzlikins also. Like, there's some really interesting goalies who no one's going to want to draft.
That's like, who's Calgary's goalie going to be?
The trouble is that like there's going to be some people who are going to be like the Ottawa Senators at the real draft who are going to think like they can draft smarter than anyone's like they're going to be really cool and reach for this guy that there's no reason to reach for, but they just want to show everyone. It's like, oh yeah, I know who Mackenzie Blackwood is and I want him now.
Well, they could do that. So fine. Then I'll get Robin Lehner if he I'll obviously have my tiers.
But that could happen for like 9 goalies.
Yeah. But when you're drafting, the nice thing is you have your tiers. So I could see like when to start drafting goalies, depending on, I could see how many people are left that interest me. Yeah. Cool. So I guess we'll talk maybe tomorrow. I'll be in touch.
Cool.
When we hear back from Cam. Okay.
Yeah,
bye.
I'll be at an event from 7 till later, but.
Oh, okay. Well, that's that then.
What time are you recording with Cam?
I don't know. I haven't confirmed with him.
Okay. Well, keep me posted.
Okay.
And I would love to at least like sort of join in.
That'd be great. Okay. Don't forget, Zane, you got the show notes, I assume, for today?
Probably.
Okay, cool. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.